The banker's pistol gleamed in the autumn sun, pointed not at Caleb Turner's chest, but at everything he'd built: his land, his daughter's future, his dead wife's memory. Sign the marriage certificate, Turner, or I foreclose tomorrow. Across the churchyard stood Eliza Rowan, 28 and unwanted, her intelligent eyes burning with quiet rage. Neither had chosen this. Neither wanted this. But in 1881 Colorado, survival didn't ask permission. Their vows would be spoken under threat, witnessed by a town hungry for scandal, sealing two strangers into a union born of coercion, desperation, and the cruelest kind of fate. Welcome to a story of forced beginnings and fierce redemption. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of survival and unexpected love can travel. The morning Caleb Turner's life shattered for the second time, the sky over Blackstone, Colorado was the color of old bruises, purple and gray, pressing down on the San Juan Mountains like a threat. He stood in front of the first bank of Blackstone, his hat in his hands, the September wind cutting through his work shirt, and knew with absolute certainty that he was about to lose everything. Again. Mr. Turner. Harold Gaines emerged from the bank's heavy doors, his suit immaculate, his smile sharp as a skinning knife. Right on time. I do appreciate punctuality in my debtors. Caleb's jaw tightened. At 34, he'd already buried one wife, raised a grieving daughter alone for 2 years, and watched his cattle ranch, the land his father had died defending, slide toward ruin despite 16-hour days and hands rubbed raw. The drought had been merciless. The cattle market had collapsed, and Harold Gaines, Blackstone's most powerful banker, had been circling like a vulture ever since. I'm here about the extension, Caleb said, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't waste words anymore, not since Sarah died. You said we could discuss terms. Indeed, Gaines gestured toward the street. But not here. Walk with me, Turner. There's someone you need to meet. Caleb followed, unease prickling down his spine. Main Street was busy for a Saturday, farmers loading supplies, women in their good dresses heading to the general store, children darting between wagons. Blackstone wasn't a large town, maybe 800 souls, but it was prosperous enough. The silver mines in the mountains kept money flowing, kept men drinking, kept the respectable families feeling superior to the ranchers and miners who actually broke their backs for a living. Gaines led him toward the white-painted church at the end of the street. Caleb's boots slowed. Why are we going to the church? Because, Mr. Turner, I'm about to offer you salvation. Gaines stopped at the churchyard gate, his pale eyes gleaming. You owe me $6,000. Your property is worth, at current market rates, perhaps 5. You have no collateral, no cosigner, and no prospects. By every measure, I should foreclose immediately. Caleb's hands fisted at his sides. I can make the payments. Just give me until spring. The herd will die in the winter, or you'll sell them at a loss, and we both know it. Gaines pulled out a pocket watch, checked it with theatrical precision. But I'm a reasonable man, Turner, a pillar of this community. I don't want to see a widower and his child thrown off their land. He paused. So I'm prepared to forgive your entire debt. Every penny. Caleb stared at him. In exchange for what? A small favor. Gaines nodded toward the church. There's a woman inside, Miss Eliza Rowan. Perhaps you've heard of her. He had. Everyone in Blackstone had heard of Eliza Rowan, the schoolteacher who'd arrived 3 years ago with credentials from some Eastern college, who dared to teach algebra to girls and had been dismissed by the school board for it. The woman who'd opened a private tutoring service in her tiny rented room and made just enough to survive. The spinster who walked through town with her spine straight and her chin up, ignoring the whispers that followed her like smoke. Old Maid. Too educated. Too proud. Unnatural. What about her? Caleb asked slowly. Gaines smiled. Miss Rowan has a problem, and I have a solution that benefits us all. Her father left her a modest inheritance when he passed last month, property in Chicago, some investments. But there's a condition in the will. She must be married within 60 days, or everything passes to her cousin, a rather unpleasant gentleman who's been making her life difficult. He straightened his cuffs. I hold the deed to that Chicago property as collateral for a loan I made to her father years ago. If she marries, she inherits, pays me what's owed, and everyone walks away satisfied. You want me to marry her? Caleb's voice was flat with disbelief. I want you to sign a marriage certificate, Turner. What happens after is your business. Gaines's smile widened. You need your debt cleared. She needs a husband. It's elegantly simple. And if you refuse, he shrugged. I file foreclosure papers Monday morning. You and that little girl of yours will be off Turner Ranch by the end of the month. The world seemed to tilt. Caleb thought of his daughter, Emma, 6 years old, still having nightmares about her mother's death, still sleeping with Sarah's old shawl clutched in her fists. He thought of his father's grave on the ridge overlooking the ranch, the land 3 generations of Turners had worked and died for. This is insane, he whispered. This is business. Gaines pulled a folded document from his jacket. The ceremony is scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon. Reverend Walsh is waiting. Miss Rowan has already agreed to the arrangement. She's as trapped as you are, Turner. All you have to do is show up, say your vows, and sign. Your debt disappears. You keep your land. She gets her inheritance. Everyone survives. And if I say no? Gaines's expression went cold. Then I'll enjoy owning Turner Ranch. I hear the eastern pasture would make excellent hunting grounds. For a long moment, Caleb couldn't breathe. He stared at the church, at its white walls and dark windows, and felt like he was looking at his own coffin. Sarah had been gone 2 years, and he still woke reaching for her, still heard her laugh in the wind, still felt the emptiness beside him like a physical wound. The thought of standing in that church, of speaking vows to a stranger, felt like betrayal of the deepest kind. But Emma's face floated before him. Her dark curls, her solemn brown eyes, the way she asked every night if Mama was watching from heaven. He'd already failed to save Sarah. He couldn't fail Emma too. I want to speak to her first, he said hoarsely. Gaines checked his watch again. You have 1 hour. Don't waste it. The inside of Blackstone Community Church smelled like old wood and candle wax. Sunlight filtered through the plain windows, casting pale rectangles across the empty pews. At the front, near the altar, a woman stood with her back to the door. Caleb's boots echoed on the floorboards. She turned. Eliza Rowan was not beautiful in the way Sarah had been beautiful. No soft curves or gentle smiles. She was tall, nearly 5'8", with sharp cheekbones and a wide mouth currently pressed into a thin line. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her dress was gray, high-necked, practical. But her eyes, pale green, almost transparent in the light, were fierce and intelligent, burning with an emotion Caleb couldn't quite name. Anger, maybe. Or shame. Mr. Turner, her voice was clear, educated, Eastern. I assume Mr. Gaines sent you to confirm I'm not going to flee town before the ceremony. I came to ask if you actually agreed to this. Caleb stopped a few feet away, hat still in his hands. Or if he's forcing you the same way he's forcing me. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. I agreed. Under duress, but I agreed. Why? Because my cousin is a violent drunk who's already tried twice to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can control my inheritance. She folded her arms. Because I have no other family, no husband, no male relative to speak for me in court. Because the law sees me as property to be managed, and if I don't marry, I'll spend the rest of my life fighting him. Her chin lifted. Because I'm 28 years old, and I'm tired of being called an old maid by people half as educated as I am. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Caleb found himself nodding slowly. Gaines has my ranch in his pocket, he said. If I don't marry you, he forecloses. My daughter and I lose everything. Then we're both his puppets. Liza's laugh was hollow. How fitting. They stood in silence, 2 strangers bound by desperation, while dust motes drifted through the sunlight. Outside, Blackstone went about its Saturday business, oblivious to the quiet tragedy unfolding in its church. I won't pretend this is anything but what it is, Caleb said finally. A business arrangement. I have a daughter who's still grieving her mother. I work sunrise to sunset just to keep the ranch running. I can offer you a roof and food, but I can't offer you... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. I can't offer you what a real marriage should be. I'm not asking for one. Eliza's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly before she clasped them together. I need a legal husband to satisfy my father's will. You need your debt cleared. Once I have my inheritance and pay off Mr. Gaines, I'll have enough money to live independently. We can discuss an annulment after a reasonable period. An annulment? Yes. She met his eyes directly. I have no desire to trap you any more than you want to be trapped, Mr. Turner. This is survival, not romance. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt hollow. There are things you should know. About the ranch, about Emma. I'm sure there are. Eliza glanced toward the windows, where afternoon shadows were lengthening. But Mr. Gaines made it clear we have no time for lengthy negotiations. The ceremony is in less than an hour. Either we go through with this, or we both suffer the consequences. She took a breath. So I suggest we save the revelations for after we're legally bound to each other. The edge of dark humor in her tone surprised him. Caleb found his mouth twitching despite everything. You always this practical? I'm a woman alone in the world, Mr. Turner. Practicality is survival. He understood that. God help him, he understood that better than she could know. Caleb, he said quietly, if we're doing this, you should call me Caleb. Eliza. She didn't smile, but some of the frost in her expression thawed. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry it's come to this. For both of us. Yeah. Caleb looked at the altar, at the simple cross hanging above it, and felt the weight of inevitability settle over his shoulders like a yoke. Me too. Isham. At exactly 2 o'clock, Reverend Walsh stood before them with his Bible open, his expression caught between disapproval and pity. Harold Gaines sat in the front pew, watching like a man admiring his own handiwork. The church was otherwise empty. No witnesses, no well-wishers, no illusion of celebration. Just 2 people trapped in the same corner, signing away their freedom to survive. Dearly beloved, Walsh began, his voice echoing in the empty space, we are gathered here today. Caleb barely heard the words. He stood stiff in his only good shirt, the one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, and felt like he was betraying her all over again. Beside him, Eliza stood equally rigid, her face pale but composed, her hands perfectly still. When Walsh asked if anyone objected, the silence was deafening. Caleb Turner, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? His throat closed. In his mind, he saw Sarah in her wedding dress, saw her smile, heard her laugh. Forgive me, he thought desperately. I do, he forced out. Walsh turned to Eliza. Eliza Rowan, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? She didn't hesitate. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you man and wife. Walsh closed his Bible with a thud that sounded like a judge's gavel. You may kiss the bride. Caleb turned to Eliza. Her green eyes met his, and he saw his own numb horror reflected back. He leaned forward, she tilted her face up, and their lips touched briefly. A kiss that meant nothing, promised nothing, sealed nothing except a legal contract. When they pulled apart, Harold Gaines was already standing, pulling out the marriage certificate. Sign here, he said cheerfully, spreading the document on the nearest pew. Both of you. Caleb's hand shook as he signed his name. Eliza's signature was steady, her penmanship perfect. Gaines added his own flourish as witness, then folded the paper with satisfaction. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Turner. He tucked the certificate into his jacket. I'll file this Monday morning. Your debt, Caleb, is hereby forgiven. And Miss Rowan, pardon me, Mrs. Turner, you'll receive confirmation of your inheritance within the week. He tipped his hat. Pleasure doing business with you both. He walked out whistling. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat uncomfortably. I'll leave you two to discuss your arrangements. May God grant you wisdom in the days ahead. Then he was gone too, and Caleb and Eliza were alone in the church, married, trapped, and strangers. Well, Eliza said after a long silence. Her voice was carefully neutral. I suppose we should discuss logistics. I have a wagon outside, Caleb said. The ranch is about an hour's ride. I'll need to collect my daughter from Mrs. Henderson's. She watches Emma on Saturdays. Of course. Eliza smoothed her skirt. I have 2 trunks of belongings at my boarding house. I'll need to settle my account with Mrs. Pritchard. I can help you load them. Thank you. They walked out of the church together, and Caleb felt the weight of eyes on them immediately. Across the street, a cluster of women stopped their conversation to stare. Near the general store, men nudged each other and whispered. A young couple actually crossed to the other side of the street. Eliza's spine went straighter. She lifted her chin and placed her hand formally on Caleb's offered arm, and together they walked through Blackstone like they were running a gauntlet. Let them stare, she murmured. I've survived worse than gossip. You'll get plenty more of it at the ranch, Caleb warned. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, doesn't miss much. And Emma, he stopped, struggling to find words. She's not good with change. Or strangers. Especially women. She's still grieving her mother. She may never stop. Eliza nodded slowly. Then I won't try to replace her. No child should be forced to accept that. Something in Caleb's chest loosened slightly. Thank you. They reached the boarding house, and the proprietor, a thin, sharp-faced woman named Agatha Pritchard, met them at the door with obvious disapproval radiating from every inch of her person. Miss Rowan, I heard you were getting married today. Her gaze raked over Caleb. To the Turner widower. How unexpected. Mrs. Turner now, Eliza corrected calmly. I'll be settling my account and collecting my belongings. Your month isn't up until next week. Consider the extra rent my thanks for your hospitality. Eliza's smile was perfectly polite and utterly cold. I'll just be a moment. She disappeared upstairs, leaving Caleb alone with Mrs. Pritchard's judgmental stare. I hope you know what you're getting into, Mr. Turner, the woman said. That one's got ideas above her station. Thinks she's better than decent folk because she went to some fancy college back east. Caleb kept his voice even. My wife's education is her own business, ma'am. Your wife, Mrs. Pritchard sniffed. Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Women like her don't know their place. Mark my words, she'll make your life a misery. He was saved from responding when Eliza reappeared with 2 heavy trunks. Caleb took them without comment, loading them into his wagon while Eliza handed Mrs. Pritchard an envelope of money. The transaction was completed in cold silence. As they drove away, Eliza stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. You don't have to defend me to people like her, she said quietly. She had no right to speak about you that way. She had every right. I'm a woman who refused to be what this town wanted me to be. Quiet, grateful, marriageable at 20. Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. I chose education over a husband. I chose independence over safety. And now I'm exactly what they always said I'd become, desperate enough to accept any marriage, even one forced on me by a banker's manipulation. The bitterness in her voice cut deep. Caleb thought about his own desperation, about signing that marriage certificate to save his land, and realized they were more alike than he'd first understood. You're not desperate, Ekin, he said. You're trapped. There's a difference. Is there? She looked at him then, really looked at him. We both signed those papers to survive, Caleb. We're both exactly where Harold Gaines wanted us. He couldn't argue with that. They drove in silence to Mrs. Henderson's house, a neat cottage on the edge of town. The widow met them at the door with Emma hiding behind her skirts, a small girl with dark curls and enormous brown eyes, her face solemn and wary. Papa! Emma ran to him, and Caleb swept her up, holding her tight. Hey, little bear. He pressed a kiss to her hair. You have a good day? Mrs. Henderson made cookies. Emma's voice was soft, hesitant. Then she noticed Eliza standing by the wagon and went very still. Who's that? Caleb's heart clenched. Emma, this is Mrs. Turner. She's... He couldn't say it, couldn't force the words out. Eliza stepped forward, crouching down to Emma's level. She didn't try to touch the girl, didn't offer a false smile. Hello, Emma. You can call me Eliza if you like. I'm going to be staying at your ranch for a while. Emma stared at her with those 2 old eyes. Why? Because your father and I made an agreement to help each other. Eliza's voice was gentle but honest. I know this is strange and sudden. You don't have to like it, and you don't have to like me. But I promise I'll try not to make things harder for you. It was the perfect thing to say. Emma didn't smile, didn't relax, but she nodded slowly and burrowed back against Caleb's chest. Mrs. Henderson watched the exchange with knowing eyes. I heard about the wedding, she said quietly to Caleb. Whole town's talking. I'm sure they are. You need anything, Caleb Turner, you come see me. Don't you dare be too proud. She touched Emma's cheek gently. You take care of your papa, sweet girl. The drive to Turner Ranch took them into the mountains, away from Blackstone and its whispers. The road wound through aspens already turning gold with autumn, past meadows where Caleb's cattle grazed, up to where the ranch building sat in a valley surrounded by peaks. It wasn't much. A 2-story log house that needed paint, a barn that sagged slightly to one side, corrals that needed mending. But the land itself was beautiful, harsh and wild, with a creek running silver through the valley and pine forests climbing the slopes. It's not fancy, Caleb said as they pulled up to the house, but it's solid. Good water, good grazing. My grandfather built the house with his own hands. It's lovely, Eliza said, and meant it. She'd grown up in Chicago, in a narrow townhouse where you could hear the neighbors through the walls. This kind of space, this kind of silence, was foreign and oddly compelling. A Chinese woman in her 50s emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her black hair was streaked with gray, her face lined but strong. She took one look at Eliza and stopped. Mrs. Chen, Caleb said, climbing down with Emma still in his arms. This is Eliza, my wife. She'll be living here now. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. Wife? You get married? Today? It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated, Caleb Turner. But she was already moving forward, studying Eliza with shrewd assessment. You look smart. That's good. This one needs smart woman to keep him from working himself to death. She gestured toward the house. Come. I show you everything. Emma, you help your new mama learn where things are. She's not my mama, Emma said, her voice small but firm. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. No, your mama is in heaven, but this is your papa's wife now, and she lives here, so you be polite. Understand? Emma nodded reluctantly. Caleb set her down, and she ran into the house. Mrs. Chen followed, beckoning for Eliza to come along. Caleb stayed by the wagon, suddenly overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. He'd brought a wife home, a stranger. A woman who didn't love him, didn't want to be here, who was only going through this charade because she was as trapped as he was. Sarah's ghost seemed to hover over the ranch, in every corner, every memory. What the hell have I done? He thought. Inside, Eliza stood in the center of the main room, taking in the simple furniture, the cold fireplace, the dust that gathered in corners despite Mrs. Chen's efforts. The house felt empty despite its size, like a place where life had stopped and never quite started again. This was Sarah's house, Mrs. Chen said bluntly. She died 2 years ago in childbirth. Baby died too. Caleb, he don't talk about it, but this whole place still full of her. You see her things everywhere, her chair, her sewing basket, her dishes. She met Eliza's eyes. That going to bother you? No, Eliza said quietly. I'm not here to erase her memory. Good, Mrs. Chen nodded with approval. Because that little girl upstairs, she don't need another loss. You understand? I understand. You know how to cook, clean, run a house? I can learn? Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. You honest. I like that. Come. I show you kitchen. Over the next hour, Eliza received a thorough education in the workings of Turner Ranch. The kitchen was large but poorly organized. The pantry was understocked. The stove was temperamental. Upstairs there were 4 bedrooms. The master bedroom where Caleb slept, Emma's small room, a guest room currently used for storage, and Sarah's sewing room, still full of her things. You sleep where? Mrs. Chen asked bluntly when they finished the tour. Eliza had been dreading this question. I suppose the guest room, once it's cleared. Guest room full of broken furniture and old saddles. Take time to clean. Mrs. Chen studied her. You married now. You share room with husband. This isn't that kind of marriage. Marriage is marriage. You figure it out. Mrs. Chen patted her shoulder with surprising gentleness. I go home now. My own husband waiting for dinner. You need help, you come to my house, half-mile down road by the big oak tree. Caleb, he good man, but he carried too much sadness. Maybe you help him remember how to live again. Then she was gone, and Eliza was alone in a strange house with a husband who didn't want her and a child who would never accept her. She found Emma in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a glass of milk, watching her with solemn suspicion. Are you hungry? Eliza asked. I could make dinner. Mrs. Chen already made stew. It's on the stove. Oh, that was kind of her. Silence. Emma took a small sip of milk, her eyes never leaving Eliza's face. Can I ask you something? Eliza pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. What's your favorite thing to do? Reading, drawing, playing outside? I like horses, Emma said after a long pause. Papa lets me help feed them sometimes. I've never been around horses much. Maybe you could teach me. Emma's expression was skeptical. You're from the city. You probably don't like getting dirty. Actually, I love getting dirty. I used to drive my mother crazy climbing trees and catching frogs when I was your age. A flicker of interest crossed Emma's face before she squashed it. Papa says you're staying here because you made an agreement. What kind of agreement? Eliza took a breath. The girl deserved honesty, even if the truth was ugly. Your father needed help saving the ranch. I needed help with some legal problems. We decided to help each other by getting married. But you don't love him. No. And he doesn't love you. No. Emma nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. My mama loved him. She loved him so much that she died trying to give him another baby. The words were matter-of-fact, but the pain beneath them was immense. Eliza's throat tightened. I'm very sorry you lost your mother, Emma. That must hurt terribly. It hurts every day. Emma's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. And now you're here, sleeping in her house, and everyone's going to forget about her. I won't forget about her, Eliza said softly. How could I? She's your mother. She'll always be your mother. Nothing I do or say can change that. Promise? I promise. Emma stared at her for a long moment, then slid off her chair and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Eliza sat alone at the table, in a house full of ghosts, and wondered how she was going to survive this. Caleb came in after dark, smelling of horses and hay, his face drawn with exhaustion. He found Eliza in the kitchen, washing dishes from the dinner she'd eaten alone. Emma had taken her bowl upstairs and refused to come down. She's not going to make this easy, he said quietly. I don't expect her to. Eliza dried her hands. She's protecting herself the only way she knows how. Mrs. Chen showed you everything? Yes, she's formidable. She practically raised me after my mother died. Doesn't pull punches. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, and Eliza saw the bone-deep weariness in every line of his body. About the sleeping arrangements, Mrs. Chen said the guest room isn't usable yet. I can sleep down here on the sofa until... No. He shook his head. You're my wife, legally, if nothing else. People will talk if they think we're not sharing a room. And Mrs. Chen talks to the other ranch wives. Word gets around. Eliza felt her cheeks heat. You want me to sleep in your bedroom? It's a big bed. We can put a line of pillows down the middle if it makes you more comfortable. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I'm not expecting anything except appearances. I see. I'll sleep on the floor if you prefer. Don't be ridiculous. You work too hard to sleep on the floor. Eliza took a breath. Pillows will be fine. They stood in awkward silence, two strangers about to share a bed, united only by desperation and a piece of paper. I usually go to bed around 9, Caleb said finally. Have to be up before dawn to start morning chores. I'll stay down here a bit longer, give you time to settle in. All right. He pushed off the doorframe. Eliza? Yes? Thank you for being kind to Emma today, for not trying to force anything. She's been through enough forced changes, Eliza said. I won't add to that. He nodded and disappeared upstairs. Eliza heard his boots on the floorboards above, heard water splashing in the wash basin, heard the creak of bed springs. Her husband. Going to bed in what would now be their shared room, the strangeness of it threatened to overwhelm her. When she finally climbed the stairs an hour later, she found the bedroom lit by a single lamp turned low. Caleb was already in bed, turned toward the wall, his breathing deep and even. A line of pillows ran down the center of the mattress like a barricade. Eliza changed into her nightgown behind the privacy screen in the corner, then slipped beneath the covers on her side, careful not to disturb the pillow wall. The bed was warm from his body heat. The room smelled like soap and leather and something indefinably masculine. She lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of his presence just inches away. This was her life now, this stranger, this house, this impossible situation. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. The wind whispered through the pines, and in the bed she never wanted to share, Eliza Turner, born Eliza Rowan, raised to believe education could save her, trapped into marriage by a banker's greed, closed her eyes and tried not to think about how thoroughly her life had shattered, just like the man sleeping beside her. Two broken people, one forced marriage, and no idea how to survive what came next. The first morning of Eliza's married life began in darkness, jolted awake by the sound of boots on floorboards and the creak of hinges. She opened her eyes to find Caleb already dressed, moving quietly through the room like a shadow, careful not to wake her. He froze when he realized she was watching. "Didn't mean to disturb you," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Go back to bed. Sun's not even up yet." "What time is it?" 4:15. He reached for his hat on the bedpost. "I've got to check the herd, mend some fence in the south pasture. Mrs. Chen won't be here until 7. Eliza sat up, pushing her braid over her shoulder. "What needs doing in the house?" "Nothing that can't wait. You don't have to... I'm not sleeping while there's work to be done." She stood, reaching for her wrapper. "I'll make coffee. Start breakfast." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. "Stove's temperamental. Needs kindling on the left side or it won't catch. I'll figure it out." He studied her for a moment in the dim lamplight, something unreadable in his expression, then nodded and left. She heard his boots descending the stairs, heard the front door open and close, and then she was alone in his bedroom, their bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of his previous life. The room was sparse, almost barren. A simple bed frame, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a washstand. But on the small table beside what had clearly been Sarah's side of the bed, there was a hairbrush with strands of blonde hair still caught in the bristles, a pair of worn slippers tucked beneath the bed frame, and on the wall, a small daguerreotype of a young woman with soft features and kind eyes, holding a baby Emma. Sarah Turner, the first wife, the loved wife. Eliza turned away from the portrait and dressed quickly in the pre-dawn cold. Downstairs, she confronted the iron stove with determination born of stubbornness. It took 3 attempts and singed fingers before she coaxed a flame to life, but eventually the kitchen warmed and coffee began to percolate with a rich, bitter smell. She found flour, salt, baking powder, mixed biscuit dough with hands that remembered her mother's kitchen, before the sickness, before the debts, before everything fell apart. The motions were soothing, familiar, a small piece of control in a life that had spun wildly beyond her grasp. By the time pale light began filtering through the windows, she had biscuits in the oven, bacon sizzling in the skillet, and eggs ready to fry. The kitchen smelled like breakfast, like normalcy, like maybe this impossible situation could be survived. Small footsteps on the stairs made her turn. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her dark hair a wild tangle around her face. She stopped when she saw Eliza, her expression shuddering closed. "Good morning," Eliza said carefully. "Are you hungry?" Emma didn't answer, just padded to the table and climbed into her chair. She sat with her hands folded, waiting, her eyes tracking Eliza's every movement with the wariness of a feral cat. Eliza plated bacon and eggs, added a biscuit, set it in front of the girl. Emma stared at it. "It's not poisoned," Eliza said with a hint of dry humor. "Mama always made flapjacks on Saturday mornings," Emma said quietly. "With molasses." The words hit like a slap. Of course Sarah had made flapjacks. Of course Emma was comparing every single thing Eliza did to her mother, finding it wanting. "I don't know how to make flapjacks," Eliza admitted. But I can learn if you'd like to teach me sometime. Emma picked up her fork, took a small bite of egg, chewed, swallowed. These are too salty. They probably were. Eliza's hands had been shaking when she'd added the salt. I'll use less next time. Mama never made them too salty. Your mother was probably a much better cook than I am. Emma looked up then, surprise flickering across her face, as if she'd expected Eliza to argue or make excuses. She was the best cook in the whole valley. Everyone said so. Then I have a lot to learn. Eliza poured coffee into a tin cup, added cream. But I promise I'll keep trying. They ate in silence, the tension thick enough to cut. When Caleb came in 20 minutes later, his face windburned and his hands streaked with dirt, he stopped in the doorway and stared at the table, at the food, at his daughter eating without being coaxed, at Eliza sitting across from her with her spine straight and her chin up despite the obvious strain. You made breakfast, he said, stating the obvious. Someone had to. Eliza stood, fixing him a plate. Sit. Eat before it gets cold. He obeyed, sinking into his chair with the heaviness of a man who'd already worked half a day. Emma pushed bits of egg around her plate, watching her father with anxious eyes. Papa, do I have to go to school on Monday? She asked suddenly. Caleb looked up from his food. Of course you do. Why wouldn't you? Because everyone's going to say things. About her? Emma's gaze flicked to Eliza, then away. About you getting married so fast. About why. Let them say what they want, Caleb said firmly. You hold your head high and remember you're a Turner. We don't run from gossip. But Mrs. Pritchard told Mrs. Henderson that Eliza is... Emma stopped, her cheeks flushing. What did she say? Eliza asked quietly. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. That you're a fallen woman, that Papa only married you because you had to get married. The implication hung in the air like poison. Eliza felt her face go hot, then cold. Caleb's fork clattered onto his plate. That's a damned lie, he said, his voice hard as iron. And if I hear you repeating it, Emma Grace Turner, you'll be mucking stalls for a month. Do you understand me? Emma flinched. Yes, Papa. Eliza is my wife. She's a decent woman who's been treated poorly by this town, and I won't have you adding to that. He stood abruptly, his breakfast half-eaten. I need to get back to the fence line. Mrs. Chen should be here soon. He grabbed his hat and was gone, leaving Eliza and Emma alone with the wreckage of the conversation. I didn't mean to make him angry, Emma whispered, tears welling in her eyes. You didn't. He's angry at the people spreading lies. Eliza reached across the table, then thought better of it and pulled her hand back. But Emma, you need to understand something. I know you don't want me here. I know every part of this feels wrong to you, but I'm not going to disappear just because the town says cruel things, and neither should you. I don't know how to do this, Emma said, her voice breaking. Everyone at school is going to ask questions, and I don't know what to tell them. Tell them the truth. Your father and I got married to help each other. That's all they need to know. Eliza gathered the plates, her own hands shaking now. And if they're unkind about it, you remember what your father said. You're a Turner. That means something in this valley, even if people forget it sometimes. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, nodded slowly, and fled upstairs before the tears could really start. Eliza stood alone in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the sink, and let herself feel the weight of it all. The suspicion, the resentment, the impossible task of making a life in a house where she would never truly belong. When Mrs. Chen arrived an hour later, she took one look at Eliza's face and made a sound of disapproval. Already the gossips are working, she said, unpinning her shawl. I hear it at the general store yesterday afternoon. Mrs. Pritchard, she tell everyone you and Caleb have some scandal, that you force him into marriage. It's the other way around, actually, Eliza said bitterly. Harold Gaines forced us both. Mrs. Chen's eyes sharpened. The banker? What do you have to do with this? Eliza hesitated, then found herself telling the whole story. The debt, the inheritance, the impossible choice. The wedding that was really just a business transaction wrapped in sacred vows. Mrs. Chen listened without interruption, her weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. That man is Snake, she pronounced when Eliza finished. My husband, he borrowed money from Gaines 5 years ago to buy equipment. We pay back every penny plus interest, but gains, he's tried to say we still owe more. We have to get lawyer from Denver to prove we pay already. She shook her head. You do this to many people. Find ways to trap them, control them. You and Caleb, you just his newest victims. Which doesn't change the fact that the whole town thinks I'm a scheming woman who trapped a widower. Let them think what they want. You know the truth. Caleb knows the truth. Mrs. Chen started rolling up her sleeves. Now, you say you want to learn to run this house? I teach you, but first, we clean. The next 6 hours were a crash course in frontier housekeeping. Mrs. Chen was a ruthless instructor, showing Eliza how to properly manage the temperamental stove, how to make bread that didn't come out dense as a brick, how to organize the pantry for winter, how to wash clothes in the big copper tub without scalding her hands raw. She explained which neighbors could be trusted and which were poisonous gossips, which merchants in Blackstone gave fair prices, and which cheated, which trails on the ranch were safe, and which were treacherous in bad weather. Sarah, she learned all this when she married Caleb, Mrs. Chen said as they hung laundry on the line behind the house. She come from good family in Denver, very refined, didn't know nothing about ranch life. But she work hard, learn fast, never complain. She pinned a sheet with practiced efficiency. You different from her. That not bad thing, just different. Emma hates that I'm different. Emma hate that her mama is dead, Mrs. Chen corrected gently. You just remind her of what she lost, give her time. She's smart girl, but she hurt deep. I don't know how to help her. You don't help by trying too hard. You help by being steady, by being here when she's ready. Mrs. Chen fixed Eliza with a knowing look. Same with Caleb. That man, he lock his heart away when Sarah die. He work himself like machine, never rest, never feel. You want to reach him, you have to be patient. I'm not trying to reach him, Eliza said quickly. This is temporary, a legal arrangement. Mrs. Chen snorted. You tell yourself that. But I see how he look at you this morning when he come in for breakfast. Like he's surprised, like maybe he remember what it feel like to have wife who care enough to cook for him. She handed Eliza another clothespin. You be careful, Eliza Turner. This marriage may start as paper agreement, but you both real people with real hearts. Things change when people live together, share space, share burdens. Before you know it, you feel things you don't plan to feel. Eliza wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because Mrs. Chen was right about one thing, she had felt a strange pang this morning when Caleb looked at the breakfast table, when his exhausted face softened just slightly. Not attraction, exactly, but something. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that they were both just trying to survive. That afternoon, while Mrs. Chen went home to tend her own household, Eliza explored the ranch. She walked down to the barn, where horses hung their heads over stall doors and nickered at her approach. She climbed the hill behind the house and looked out over the valley, at the silver ribbon of creek and the golden aspens and the mountains rising like sentinels against the sky. The land was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, demanding everything from those who tried to tame it. She found Caleb in the south pasture, stripped down to his undershirt despite the autumn chill, sweat darkening the fabric as he wrestled a new fence post into position. He looked up when her shadow fell across the ground, wariness flickering across his face. Didn't expect to see you out here, he said. Mrs. Chen sent me home with a list of things you need from town. I thought I'd ask before I hitched up the wagon. You know how to drive a wagon? I can learn. Eliza gestured at the fence. Is this where the break is? One of them. Cattle pushed through during the last storm. Lost 3 head before I found them. He wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt. It's constant. Fix one thing, another breaks. Feels like I'm trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. There was such bone-deep weariness in his voice that Eliza felt something crack in her chest. What can I do to help? He looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. You already made breakfast. That's more than enough. I'm not asking out of wifely duty, Caleb. I'm asking because I have 2 hands and a functioning brain, and sitting in that house all day while you work yourself to death seems like a waste of both. She crossed her arms. So tell me, what needs doing that I could actually manage? He stared at her for a long moment, then pointed toward a pile of fence rails stacked nearby. Those need to be carried over here, one at a time. They're heavy, But if you can manage it, it'll save me a lot of walking back and forth. Eliza walked to the pile, hefted one of the rails experimentally. It was heavy, rough wood that immediately gave her splinters, but she could carry it. She brought it to where Caleb was working, then went back for another. They worked in silence, falling into an unspoken rhythm. Caleb would finish securing one post, and Eliza would have the next rail waiting. The sun climbed higher, the day warmed, and her shoulders began to ache, but she didn't stop, didn't complain. After the 8th rail, Caleb paused. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know. Your hands are going to be blistered. Then I'll learn to wear gloves." She set down the rail and met his eyes. "I'm not fragile, Caleb. I'm not going to shatter if I work hard." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant respect. Sarah hated the ranch work. She did it because she had to, but she always wanted to move back to Denver, to civilization. She used to say she married a rancher but wished she'd married a banker. The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. "I'm sorry," Eliza said quietly. "That must have been hard." It was honest, at least. Caleb picked up his hammer. "She loved me, but she hated this life. Resented me for keeping her here. When she got pregnant the second time, she was so happy because she thought maybe it would be a boy, and I'd have an heir, and we could finally leave." His voice went rough. "Instead, she died trying to give me something I never asked for." Eliza didn't know what to say to that kind of pain, so she just picked up another rail and brought it to him, and they kept working until the fence was mended and the sun was sinking toward the western peaks. That evening, Emma came downstairs for dinner with red-rimmed eyes and a stubborn set to her jaw. She ate the stew Eliza had reheated without comment, ignoring both adults completely. When Caleb asked about her day, she gave one-word answers. When he tried to get her to talk about school, she pushed her bowl away and asked to be excused. "Emma," Caleb said, his voice tight with frustration. "This is hard for all of us, but you can't just—" "I miss Mama," Emma burst out, tears spilling over. "I miss her every single day, and now there's a stranger sleeping in her bed and cooking in her kitchen, and everyone in town is saying horrible things, and I hate it. I hate all of it." She ran from the room before either of them could respond. Caleb started to rise, but Eliza put a hand on his arm. "Let her go. She needs to cry." "She's been crying for 2 years. Then maybe she needs to cry for 2 more. Eliza withdrew her hand, suddenly aware of how warm his skin was beneath the fabric of his sleeve. "You can't fix grief by forcing her to stop feeling it." "I don't know what else to do," Caleb said, and the helplessness in his voice was devastating. "I'm her father. I'm supposed to protect her, and I can't even protect her from her own sadness." "You can't. That's the terrible truth of it. She has to find her own way through." Eliza stood, began clearing the dishes. "All you can do is be there when she needs you, and try not to fall apart yourself." That night, when they climbed into bed with the pillow barricade between them, Caleb spoke into the darkness. "You worked hard today. Thank you." "You're welcome." Silence. Then, "Your hands all right?" Eliza looked at her palms, at the blisters forming across her fingers. "They'll toughen up." "Eliza?" "Yes?" "Why did you really agree to this marriage? The inheritance, I understand that part. But you could have fought your cousin in court, hired a lawyer. Why this?" She lay very still, staring at the ceiling. "Because I'm 28 years old, and I've spent the last 10 years fighting to be taken seriously as an educated woman in a world that thinks women's brains are inferior. I've been dismissed, patronized, called unnatural and unwomanly for wanting to use my mind. And when my father died and left me that inheritance with a marriage requirement, it felt like even he didn't believe I could survive on my own." Her voice went hard. "So I agreed to this because at least it's a bargain I walked into with my eyes open. At least it's not some man pretending to love me while really just wanting control of my money and my life. This way we both know exactly what we are to each other. No illusions, no lies." Caleb absorbed this. "That's why you wanted the annulment clause. You're protecting yourself. Aren't you?" "Yeah." He shifted, the bed creaking. "I loved Sarah. Despite everything, despite the resentment and the arguments and the fact that we probably never should have married in the first place, I loved her, and when she died..." He stopped, started again. "I can't do that again." Can't give someone that much power to break me. So we agree then. This stays what it is. A business arrangement. Yeah, we agree. But lying there in the darkness, with only a thin line of pillows separating them, both wondered if that was really possible. If two people could share space and burdens and the intimate details of daily life without something shifting, changing, becoming more than either of them planned. The answer, they would learn, was no. But they didn't know that yet. The week that followed was a careful dance of strangers learning to coexist. Eliza fell into the rhythm of ranch life, rising before dawn to make breakfast, managing the house under Mrs. Chen's exacting tutelage, helping with whatever work her inexperienced hands could manage. Caleb worked from sunup to sundown, coming in exhausted and dirt-streaked, speaking only when necessary. Emma watched them both with wary eyes, looking for cracks, waiting for the moment when this new reality would shatter and her old life would somehow return. On Monday, Eliza drove Emma to school in the wagon, enduring the girls' sullen silence and the stares of other mothers dropping off their children. She felt their judgment like physical blows, saw them whispering behind their hands, saw the way they pulled their children closer, as if Eliza's mere presence might contaminate them. The teacher, a pinched-faced woman named Miss Hartwell, looked Eliza up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Mrs. Turner," she said, making the title sound like an accusation, "how unexpected to see you here." "I'm bringing my stepdaughter to school," Eliza said evenly, refusing to flinch. "Ah, yes, your sudden marriage. The whole town is talking about it." "I'm sure they are." Miss Hartwell's smile was poisonous. "Well, I do hope you'll be a positive influence on dear Emma. The child has been through so much trauma already. She doesn't need further instability." Eliza felt her temper rising, hot and dangerous. "Emma will be just fine, thank you." "Cut. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a ranch to run." She left before she could say something she'd regret, but she felt Miss Hartwell's stare burning into her back all the way to the wagon. That evening, when Emma came home, she went straight to her room without speaking. Caleb found her there an hour later, crying into her pillow. "They said you're not my real mama?" Emma sobbed when he asked what was wrong. "They said you only married Eliza because you needed someone to cook and clean, and that I have to do whatever she says because she's the lady of the house now." Caleb sat on the edge of her bed, his heart breaking. "What did you tell them?" "I said she's not my mama, and she never will be." And then Jenny Marshall said, "At least I have a new mama, because her papa says I was turning into a wild thing without a woman to raise me properly." "You're not a wild thing, little bear. You're perfect exactly as you are." "But everyone thinks I need a new mama." "Everyone thinks Eliza is here to replace the old one." Emma sat up, her face blotchy with tears. "Is she, Papa? Is that why you married her?" "No." Caleb pulled his daughter close, feeling inadequate and lost. "Eliza is here because we made an agreement to help each other, that's all. She's not trying to replace your mother. Nobody could." "Then why does she have to live here? Why does she have to sleep in Mama's bed and use Mama's kitchen?" "Because she's my wife now, Emma, and wives live with their husbands. That's just how it is." "I hate it." Emma's voice was small and broken. "I hate everything about it." Caleb held her until the tears subsided, until her breathing evened out into sleep. Then he carried her to bed properly, tucked her in, and went downstairs to find Eliza sitting at the kitchen table with an open ledger and a pencil, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you doing?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "Going through the household accounts. Mrs. Chen showed me where you keep the records. Your expenses are," she hesitated. "They're not balanced properly. You've been paying too much for feed and someone's been overcharging you for flour." Caleb rubbed his eyes wearily. "I know I'm not good with numbers. Sarah used to handle the accounts before she—" He stopped. "I've just been paying what the merchants ask." "They're cheating you." Eliza turned the ledger around, pointing to a column of figures. "Look, the price for oats here is nearly double what it should be. And this invoice from the blacksmith, he's charging you for work that was never done." Caleb leaned over her shoulder, studying the numbers. She was right. Of course she was right. "I don't have time to argue with merchants," he said tiredly. "I barely have time to keep the ranch running." "Then let me handle it. I can go into town, renegotiate your accounts, Make sure you're not being robbed blind." She looked up at him, her green eyes fierce. "I may not know how to birth a calf or mend a fence properly, but I know numbers. I know contracts. Let me help with this." He should have said no, should have kept this part of the ranch separate, maintained the boundaries they'd agreed on. But he was so tired, and she was looking at him like maybe he didn't have to carry everything alone. "All right," he said, "but people in town aren't going to make it easy for you." "I've never expected anything to be easy." She closed the ledger with a decisive snap. "I'll go tomorrow. Make a list of anyone else you've been dealing with, and I'll review their terms." Caleb nodded, then hesitated. "Emma had a hard day at school." "I know. I could hear her crying from down here. She told the other children you're not her mother, that you never will be." "Good." At his surprised look, Eliza shrugged. "I mean it. The last thing I want is for Emma to feel pressured to see me as anything but what I am, her father's wife, not her mother. Sarah was her mother. I'm just someone who lives in the same house." "That's all you want to be?" Eliza looked away. "What else could I be? She hates me for existing, and I don't blame her." "She doesn't hate you," Caleb said quietly. "She's just scared of losing the last pieces of her mother, of forgetting, of being forced to move on before she's ready." "Then I won't force her. I'll just be here, steady and unchanging, until she decides if she can tolerate my presence or not." Eliza stood, gathering the ledger. "That's the best I can offer." It was more than enough, Caleb thought, more than Emma probably deserved, given how cruel she'd been. More than he had any right to ask. "Thank you," he said. Eliza paused in the doorway. "For what?" "For not giving up on us yet. For still trying." Something flickered across her face, pain maybe, or loneliness. "I made a promise when I signed that marriage certificate. I may not have chosen this life, Caleb, but I don't break my word." She met his eyes. "Even when it's hard, even when I'm not wanted, I stay." Then she was gone, climbing the stairs to the bedroom they shared, and Caleb stood alone in the kitchen wondering when this strange, unwanted marriage had started to feel less like a prison and more like a lifeline. 2 weeks into the marriage, Eliza drove the wagon into Blackstone alone, the ledger tucked under her arm and a list of merchants in her pocket. The morning was sharp with October cold, frost still clinging to the shadowed places, and her breath misted in the air as she guided the horses down the rutted road. She'd learned to manage the team through sheer determination and bruised hands, refusing to ask Caleb for help with something so fundamental. If she was going to survive on this ranch, she needed to be capable. The town greeted her with cold stares and whispered conversations that stopped the moment she drew near. Eliza lifted her chin and walked into the feed store with the ledger open, ready for battle. The proprietor, a thick-necked man named Wilcox, looked up from his counter, and his expression soured immediately. "Mrs. Turner," he said, managing to make her married name sound like an insult. "What can I do for you?" "You can explain why you've been charging my husband double the market rate for oats." Eliza set the ledger on the counter, pointing to the relevant entries. "And why these invoices show delivery of 600 pounds when Mr. Turner's records indicate he only received 400. Wilcox's face went red. "You calling me a cheat?" "I'm calling these numbers inaccurate. Either you've made significant errors in your bookkeeping, or you've been deliberately overcharging a man too exhausted to notice." She met his eyes steadily. "Which is it?" "Your husband never complained before." "My husband is a rancher, not an accountant. He trusted you to deal fairly with him. That appears to have been a mistake." Eliza pulled out a sheet of paper covered in her precise handwriting. "Here are the correct market rates for feed, based on prices from Denver and Colorado Springs. I expect you to honor these rates going forward and to provide a credit for the overcharges from the past 6 months." Wilcox sputtered. "I'll do no such thing. Your husband signed for those deliveries. If he was too stupid to check the weight—" "Careful," Eliza said softly, her voice dropping into dangerous territory. "You're speaking about my husband. And if you continue to speak about him in that manner, I'll make sure every rancher in this valley knows how you've been conducting business. I wonder how many others have been too trusting, too busy, or too tired to notice they were being robbed." The threat hung in the air between them. Wilcox's jaw worked, fury and calculation warring in his expression. Finally, He snatched the paper from her hand. Fine. New rates start today, but there will be no credit for past charges. Then there will be no future business. The Miller Ranch has a feed store, and they've offered us better terms. It was a bluff. She hadn't spoken to the Millers, but her voice didn't waver. Wilcox slammed his fist on the counter. You're a hard woman, Mrs. Turner. I'm a fair woman who won't let her family be cheated. Eliza picked up the ledger. Do we have an agreement or not? He glared at her for a long moment, then jerked his head in a nod. Credit of $40, but I want payment on the next order in advance. 30 days credit is standard. If you can't offer that, we'll take our business elsewhere. She won. She could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the bitter twist of his mouth. 30 days. But if Turner's even 1 day late, he won't be. Eliza extended her hand. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Wilcox. He stared at her outstretched hand like it was a snake, then turned away without shaking it. Get out of my store! Eliza left with her head high, but her hands were trembling by the time she reached the wagon. The confrontation had taken more out of her than she'd expected, not because of the conflict itself, but because of the naked hatred in Wilcox's eyes. She was making enemies with every word she spoke, burning bridges she might someday need to cross. But the alternative was watching Caleb slowly lose everything because he was too proud or too tired to fight back. She made 3 more stops that morning: the blacksmith, the general store, the grain merchant. Each conversation followed the same pattern: shock that a woman dared to question their charges, indignation at being called to account, and finally grudging agreement when faced with evidence of their dishonesty. By noon, Eliza had renegotiated terms with every major supplier, saved the ranch nearly $200 in unnecessary expenses, and made herself the most hated woman in Blackstone. She was loading supplies into the wagon when a voice behind her made her freeze. Mrs. Turner, how fortuitous! I was hoping to run into you. Harold Gaines stood on the boardwalk, immaculate as always in his tailored suit, his pale eyes gleaming with something that might have been amusement or might have been malice. Mr. Gaines. Eliza kept her voice neutral, her hand steady on the flour sack she was lifting. I have nothing to say to you. Oh, I think you do. He descended the steps, moving closer. I've been hearing interesting reports about your activities this morning, renegotiating your husband's accounts, threatening merchants, making quite the impression. His smile was thin and sharp. You're proving to be far more assertive than I anticipated. If you expected me to be meek and grateful, you don't know me at all. On the contrary, I know you very well, Eliza. He dropped her first name deliberately, intimately. I know you're intelligent, educated, desperate. I know you agreed to this marriage because you had no other choice. And I know that right now you're wondering if you made a terrible mistake. Eliza turned to face him fully. What do you want? Merely to remind you of the terms of our arrangement. Gaines pulled an envelope from his jacket. Your inheritance is being processed, as promised. Once the probate clears, another few weeks at most, you'll receive the full amount, minus my commission for the loan I made to your late father, of course. At which point, you're free to reconsider your living situation. You mean the annulment. I mean your freedom. You fulfilled your obligation by marrying, but you're a clever woman, Eliza. Surely you've realized that staying married to a struggling rancher with a hostile child isn't in your best interests. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Take your inheritance, file for divorce on grounds of incompatibility, and start fresh somewhere else. Chicago, perhaps, or Boston, somewhere your education would actually be valued. It was everything she'd told herself she wanted, the escape clause, the way out. But standing there in the dusty street, with the weight of the morning's battles still fresh, and the memory of Caleb's exhausted gratitude echoing in her mind, Eliza found the offer tasted like ash. And what do you get out of this? She asked. Why do you care whether I stay married to Caleb or not? Gaines's smile widened. Let's just say I have plans for the Turner Ranch that don't include a strong-willed woman interfering with business. Caleb on his own is manageable. Caleb with a wife who actually understands finances and contracts. He shrugged. That's more complicated. Understanding crashed over her like cold water. You're not done with him. Forgiving the debt wasn't generosity, it was strategy. You want something else from that land. The eastern pasture has excellent mineral potential. silver possibly, and the water rights to Turner Creek would be valuable to several mining operations I have interests in. Gaines straightened his cuffs. But those are concerns for another day. Today, I'm simply offering you a way out of an unfortunate situation. Think about it, Eliza. You don't owe Caleb Turner anything beyond what's already been given. Take your money and go. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing by the wagon with her heart pounding and fury rising in her throat like bile. So that was the real game. Gaines had forced this marriage not just to collect on her inheritance, but to maintain control over Caleb. And now that she was proving to be an obstacle rather than a pawn, he wanted her gone. The realization crystallized something in Eliza's mind. She might have entered this marriage as a prisoner, but she'd be damned if she'd let Harold Gaines decide when and how it ended. She finished loading the wagon and drove home with her jaw set and her mind racing. Caleb was in the barn when she arrived, doctoring a lame horse, his hands gentle on the animal's injured leg. He looked up when her shadow fell across the doorway, and something in her expression made him straighten immediately. What happened? Harold Gaines stopped me in town. He made it very clear that forgiving your debt was never about generosity. Eliza walked into the barn, her skirt swishing through the hay. He wants your land, Caleb. Specifically the eastern pasture and the water rights to the creek. The marriage, the debt forgiveness, it was all just a way to keep you docile and manageable while he works out how to take what he wants. Caleb's face went hard. The eastern pasture. He's been asking to lease it for the past year, claiming he has clients interested in hunting grounds. I kept saying no. Because you're not an idiot, and you know once he gets a toehold on your land, he'll find a way to take the rest. Eliza crossed her arms. He also suggested I take my inheritance and leave, divorce you on grounds of incompatibility. Get out of his way. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. The horse shifted, blowing softly through its nostrils. And? Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. Are you going to? Is that what you want? For me to leave once the money comes through? I asked you first. Eliza took a breath. 3 weeks ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. This marriage was supposed to be temporary, a legal maneuver to protect us both. But now, she gestured around the barn at the ranch beyond. Now I've spent 2 weeks learning every detail of how this place runs. I've renegotiated your supplier contracts, saved you money you desperately need, and started to understand what you're actually fighting for here. And the thought of walking away and letting Harold Gaines win makes me physically ill. So you're staying out of spite? I'm staying because I made a commitment and I don't break my word. She met his eyes directly. And because I think together we might actually have a chance of beating him. But apart? She shook her head. Apart, he'll destroy you. He'll find some legal loophole, some technicality, and he'll take this ranch piece by piece until there's nothing left. Caleb studied her for a long moment, and she could see him processing, calculating, weighing trust against risk. If you stay, he said slowly, it can't just be on paper anymore. Gaines is going to push harder now that you've challenged him. He'll look for weaknesses, for cracks in our story. We'd need to... He struggled with the words. We'd need to actually be married. Not just legally, but in a way that looks real to the outside world. I'm not sleeping with you, Eliza said bluntly. A flush crept up Caleb's neck. That's not what I meant. I just meant we'd need to present a united front. Stop keeping the marriage at arm's length. Let people see us as actual partners, not two strangers forced together. And Emma? Emma will adjust. Or she won't. But that's not a reason to let Gaines win. It was the most pragmatic, unromantic proposal for a real marriage that Eliza had ever heard, and yet it made perfect sense. They were already living together, already sharing the burdens of the ranch. Why not make it official in more than just name? All right, she said, we do this properly, full partnership. I handle the finances and household, you handle the land and livestock, and we make decisions together. No more you working yourself to death alone. No more me tiptoeing around trying not to disturb your grief. We face Gaines as a team. Caleb extended his hand. Partners. Eliza shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Partners. They were still standing there, hands clasped, when Emma appeared in the barn doorway with Mrs. Chen right behind her. Papa, there's a man here to see you, Emma said, her voice uncertain. He says his name is Mr. Dawson, and he's from Denver, and he needs to talk to you right away about something important. Caleb and Eliza exchanged glances. Did he say what it's about? Legal matters, Mrs. Chen supplied, her expression worried. He have official papers. Look serious. They found the man waiting by the house, tall, gray-haired, carrying a leather satchel that marked him as either a lawyer or a land agent. He introduced himself as Thomas Dawson, attorney at law, and asked if they could speak privately. In the kitchen, Dawson spread papers across the table with the careful precision of a man delivering bad news. Mr. Turner, Mrs. Turner, I've been retained by the Colorado Territorial Land Office to investigate irregularities in property claims in this valley, specifically claims involving water rights and mineral deposits. He pulled out a survey map. Your ranch sits on what we believe to be a significant silver deposit in the eastern pasture. Additionally, Turner Creek provides water access to 3 neighboring properties, which means your water rights have substantial value. I know my land has value, Caleb said carefully. What's this about? 3 weeks ago, a claim was filed asserting that the original land grant to your grandfather contained errors in the boundary descriptions and that approximately 200 acres of what you believe to be Turner Ranch actually belongs to the Territorial Trust. Dawson pointed to a section of the map. Including the eastern pasture and a significant portion of the creek. Eliza felt ice slide down her spine. Who filed this claim? A holding company called Mountain Resources Limited, based in Denver. Dawson pulled out another document. But the principal investor and director is listed as Harold Gaines of Blackstone. Of course it was. Of course Gaines hadn't been content to wait. He'd found another way to attack. Another angle to take what he wanted. Caleb's face had gone white. That's insane. My family has held clear title to this land for 40 years. My grandfather fought claim jumpers and died defending this property. There are no errors in the boundaries. I don't doubt that, Mr. Turner. But challenging a territorial claim takes time, money, and legal expertise. That's why I'm here, to offer my services. I believe this claim is fraudulent, but proving it will require we go through official channels, contest the survey, and demonstrate continuous occupation and improvement. Dawson's expression was sympathetic but grim. It could take months, maybe longer. How much will this cost? Eliza asked, her mind already calculating their limited resources. My retainer is $500. Additional costs will depend on how aggressively Gaines's lawyers fight, whether we need expert surveyors, whether it goes to territorial court. He trailed off. I won't lie to you. This could run into thousands. Caleb sat down heavily. I don't have thousands. I barely have 500. Then we'll find it, Eliza said. Her voice was steady, but inside she was calculating frantically. Her inheritance, when it came through, would be enough. But that was weeks away, and Dawson was telling them they needed to act now. There may be another option, Dawson said carefully. If you could demonstrate significant recent improvements to the contested land, new structures, enhanced water management, anything that shows active development and investment, it would strengthen your claim considerably. The Territorial Trust is less likely to award land that's been actively improved to a holding company with no connection to the area. What kind of improvements? Caleb asked. A new barn, expanded irrigation, fencing, anything substantial and documented. Dawson closed his satchel. And it would need to be done quickly before the initial hearing in 6 weeks. I know that's a short timeline, but we'll manage, Eliza interrupted. Mr. Dawson, we'll need a few days to secure your retainer, but we want to retain you immediately. In the meantime, can you file a formal response to the claim? Something that puts Gaines on notice that we're not rolling over? Dawson smiled slightly. I can do that. You're very decisive, Mrs. Turner. I've had practice dealing with men who think they can take what doesn't belong to them. She stood, extending her hand. Thank you for coming all this way to warn us. It can't have been an easy journey. After Dawson left with promises to return in a week, Caleb and Eliza sat at the kitchen table in stunned silence. The evening sun slanted through the windows, gilding the dust motes and casting long shadows across the floor. He's trying to steal my land, Caleb said finally, his voice hollow. Everything my family built. Everything my father and grandfather died for, and he's just going to take it through legal manipulation. Not if we fight back. With what? We don't have $500, let alone thousands. And how am I supposed to build a barn in 6 weeks while keeping the ranch running? He pushed away from the table, pacing like a caged animal. This is exactly what Gaines wanted, to trap me, to force me into a corner where I have to choose between keeping my land and going bankrupt trying to defend it. Eliza watched him wear a path across the kitchen floor, saw the desperation building in every line of his body, and made a decision. My inheritance, she said quietly. When it comes through, it's enough to hire Dawson and fund the improvements. We use that. Caleb stopped pacing. That's your money. Your escape fund. It's our money. We're married, remember? What's mine is yours under the law. She stood, moving to block his path. And I don't need an escape fund if I'm staying. You'd risk everything on a legal fight we might lose? I'd risk everything to keep a greedy bastard from stealing land from people who actually work it. Her eyes flashed. This is personal now, Caleb. He threatened you, he threatened me, and he's using the law as a weapon because he knows most people can't afford to fight back. Well, I can afford it, and I'm choosing to fight. Something broke open in Caleb's expression. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper that he quickly locked away. If we do this, if we really commit to fighting him, there's no going back. He'll come at us with everything he has. Let him try. Eliza's voice was hard as stone. We're smarter than he thinks we are, and we're not alone anymore. The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a challenge, both. They weren't alone. They had each other, whether either of them had planned for that or not. 2 days later, violence came to Turner Ranch. Caleb was working the fence line near the eastern pasture when he heard the sound of horses approaching fast. He looked up to see 3 riders cresting the ridge, and his hand instinctively went to the rifle he kept strapped to his saddle. But before he could reach it, one of the riders raised a gun and fired. The bullet caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. Pain exploded through his body, hot and blinding, and he heard his own voice cry out before he could stop it. Blood soaked his shirt, spreading dark and wet across the fabric. The riders circled him once, and through the haze of pain Caleb saw their faces. Hired muscle from Denver, the kind of men who took money to deliver messages with fists and bullets. One of them leaned down from his saddle. "Message from Mr. Gaines," the man said. "Drop the legal challenge, sign over the water rights, and this stops. Keep fighting, and next time we won't aim for your shoulder." He spat in the dirt near Caleb's head. "You got 1 week to decide." Then they were gone, thundering away across the valley, leaving Caleb bleeding in the grass with the autumn sun beating down and no help in sight. He tried to stand, but his leg wouldn't support him, must have twisted it when he fell. He managed to get to his knees, but the world spun sickeningly, and blood kept pouring from the wound. He was going to pass out. He was going to bleed out here alone, and Emma would lose another parent, and Gaines would take the ranch anyway. The sound of a wagon approaching made him lift his head. Through blurring vision, he saw Eliza driving the team hard, standing in the wagon bed like some kind of avenging angel, her hair coming loose from its pins, and her face set with determination. She'd been on her way to check the cattle in the north pasture when she'd heard the gunshot, had known immediately, with the certainty of nightmare, that something was wrong. "Caleb!" She vaulted from the wagon before it fully stopped, running to him with her skirts hiked up around her knees. "Oh God, you're shot! Don't move, just stay still." "Gaines," he managed to gasp out, "sent men, said drop the legal case or quiet, save your strength." Her hands were already on his shoulder, probing the wound with a gentleness that belied the fear in her eyes. Blood welled between her fingers, hot and slick, and Caleb saw her face go pale. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad enough." She yanked off her shawl, wadded it against the wound. "The bullet went through, which is good, but you're losing blood fast. We need to get you back to the house." Can't stand." "Then I'll help you." She maneuvered herself under his good arm, taking his weight. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. They struggled upright together, and Caleb bit back a scream as his shoulder erupted in fresh agony. Eliza half carried, half dragged him to the wagon, her strength surprising, her movements efficient and sure. She got him into the wagon bed, grabbed the reins, and drove hell-bent for the ranch house. Mrs. Chen met them at the door, took one look at Caleb's blood-soaked shirt, and started barking orders. Boil water, clean cloths, whiskey for pain and wound cleaning. Emma, you stay in your room. Don't come down no matter what you hear. She helped Eliza get Caleb into the house, onto the kitchen table. This going to hurt. You be strong. What followed was pain beyond anything Caleb had experienced. Eliza cleaned the wound with whiskey that burned like hellfire, her hands steady despite the blood coating them. She probed for bullet fragments with fingers that were gentle but thorough, and when she was satisfied the wound was clean, she packed it with clean cloth and bound it tight. "Where did you learn to do this?" Caleb gasped between waves of agony. "I worked in a hospital in Chicago during my college years, saw more gunshot wounds than I care to remember." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were dark with fear. "You're lucky the bullet didn't hit bone or nick an artery. Another inch to the left and you'd be dead. Gaines is trying to kill me." "Gaines is trying to scare you into submission. There's a difference." She tied off the bandage with efficient movements. "But he just made a critical mistake." "What's that?" Eliza looked up, and her eyes were blazing with cold fury. "He underestimated what I'm willing to do to protect what's mine, and he gave us proof of his criminal intent. Those men attacked you on your own land, Caleb. That's attempted murder. We can press charges, bring in the territorial marshal, make this much bigger than a simple property dispute." Through the haze of pain and shock, Caleb understood what she was saying. Gaines had overplayed his hand, had gotten violent when he should have stayed in the shadows, and now they had leverage. "We need witnesses," he said. "Someone who saw the riders." "I did. I was far enough back that they didn't see me, but I saw them clearly. 3 men, all armed, all on horses with the Mountain Resources brand." Eliza's smile was sharp and humorless. "I can identify them, and I will, in court if necessary." Mrs. Chen was already at the door heading out. "I get the marshal from Blackstone. He no like Gaines anyway. Banker forecloses on his brother's farm last year. He come." After she left, Eliza helped Caleb off the table and into a chair. Emma crept downstairs despite orders, took one look at her father's bandaged shoulder and blood-stained clothes, and burst into tears. "Papa, you're hurt. You're bleeding." "I'm all right, little bear." Caleb pulled her close with his good arm, ignoring the pain that lanced through him. "Just a scratch." "That's not a scratch." Emma turned on Eliza, her face blotchy with tears and fury. "This is your fault. Before you came, Papa was safe. Now people are shooting at him because of you." The accusation hit Eliza like a physical blow. She saw Caleb open his mouth to defend her, but she shook her head slightly. Emma wasn't wrong, not entirely. Gaines had escalated because Eliza had challenged him, had shown she wasn't going to be a docile wife who stayed out of ranch business. "You're right," Eliza said quietly. "I made this worse by fighting back. But your father was in danger long before I arrived, Emma. Gaines has been trying to take this ranch for years. I just made him show his hand." "I don't care about his hand. I care about my papa." Emma was sobbing now. "Everyone I love gets taken away. First Mama, and now they're trying to take Papa too, and I can't lose him." She broke down completely, and this time when Eliza reached for her, the girl didn't pull away. She clung to Eliza like a drowning person clings to driftwood, crying against her shoulder while Eliza stroked her hair and murmured wordless comfort. Over Emma's head, Caleb met Eliza's eyes, and in that moment something fundamental shifted between them. They weren't strangers anymore. Weren't just 2 people sharing space out of necessity. They were a family, broken and strange and forced together by circumstance, but a family nonetheless. And Harold Gaines had just declared war on all of them. Marshal Pete Dockery arrived at Turner Ranch 3 hours later, a weathered man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a reputation for being one of the few honest lawmen in the territory. He listened to Eliza's account of the shooting with his hat in his hands, nodding occasionally, his expression growing darker with each detail. 3 riders, you say, armed, Mountain Resources brand on the horses. He pulled out a notebook, made careful notations. "And they specifically mentioned Harold Gaines by name?" "They said the message was from Mr. Gaines," Eliza confirmed. "Drop the legal challenge, sign over the water rights, or next time they won't aim for the shoulder." Those were the exact words. Dockery looked at Caleb, who sat pale and exhausted in his chair with Emma pressed against his side. You need a doctor for that wound, Turner. Already been seen to. My wife knows medicine. That's so? The marshal's gaze shifted to Eliza with new interest. Where'd you learn doctoring, Mrs. Turner? I worked in a hospital in Chicago, charity ward. We saw everything from factory accidents to knife fights. She met his eyes steadily. I know what I'm doing, Marshal. The wound is clean, the bleeding stopped. He'll heal as long as infection doesn't set in. Dockery grunted approval. Well then, I'll ride out to the eastern pasture, see if I can find tracks, shell casings, anything to corroborate your story. Then I'll have some questions for Mr. Gaines and his business associates. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. Fair warning, though, Gaines has powerful friends. Judge Morrison in Denver, Senator Caldwell, men who owe him favors. Arresting his hired guns is one thing, but getting charges to stick when it's your word against theirs is another. Then we make sure it's not just our word, Eliza said. Those riders came from somewhere. Someone in Blackstone must have seen 3 strangers ride through town. Someone at the livery must have rented them horses or stabled them. And Mountain Resources has to have records, payroll, employment contracts. We find those records, we prove the connection. The marshal smiled slightly. You think like a lawyer, Mrs. Turner. I think like someone who's tired of watching powerful men break the law because they assume no one will fight back. She crossed her arms. We're fighting back, Marshal, and we'd appreciate any help you can offer. After Dockery left, Eliza helped Caleb upstairs despite his protests that he could manage alone. Emma followed them like a shadow, unwilling to let her father out of her sight. In the bedroom, Eliza changed the bandage with gentle efficiency while Emma sat on the edge of the bed and watched with enormous, frightened eyes. Does it hurt bad, Papa? The girl asked in a small voice. I've had worse, Caleb lied. In truth, his shoulder was on fire, throbbing with every heartbeat, but he wasn't about to tell his daughter that. I'll be fine in a few days. You need to rest, Eliza said firmly. No ranch work tomorrow. Mrs. Chen and I can handle the immediate needs, and I'll hire day workers for anything we can't manage. We can't afford day workers. We can't afford you dying of infection or reopening that wound because you're too stubborn to stay in bed. She fixed him with a look that brooked no argument. You hired me to handle the finances, Caleb. Let me handle this. He wanted to argue, but exhaustion and pain were dragging at him like weights. Just for a day or two. A week at minimum. 3 days. 5, and that's my final offer. Eliza pulled the quilt up over him. Emma, your father needs to sleep. Why don't you come help me make dinner? Emma hesitated, looking between them, then nodded slowly and followed Eliza from the room. In the kitchen, the girl sat at the table while Eliza started pulling ingredients for stew, moving through Sarah's domain with increasing confidence. You saved his life, Emma said suddenly. Eliza looked up from chopping carrots. The marshal would have found him eventually. No, you knew something was wrong. You went looking for him. Emma's hands twisted in her lap. How did you know? I heard the gunshot. It was far away, but something about it felt wrong. Eliza set down the knife, turning to face the girl properly. And I've been married to your father long enough to know when he's in trouble. You haven't been married that long. Long enough to care whether he lives or dies. The words came out more honest than Eliza had intended. She saw Emma's eyes widen slightly, saw the girl processing this admission. Do you love him? Emma asked. It was the question Eliza had been avoiding asking herself. She thought about the terror that had gripped her when she'd heard that gunshot, the way her hands had shaken while cleaning Caleb's wound, the fierce protectiveness that had flooded through her when those riders threatened him. Was that love, or was it just the natural response of someone whose survival was tied to another person's? I don't know, she said honestly. I know I respect him. I know I don't want to see him hurt. I know I'm willing to fight for this ranch, and for him and for you. Whether that's love or something else, I can't say. Emma absorbed this with the seriousness of a much older child. Mama loved him. She told me all the time, but she was always sad too. She cried a lot when she thought I couldn't hear. The revelation pierced something in Eliza's chest. Why was she sad? Because she wanted to go back to Denver. She missed the city, missed her friends, missed having nice things. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. She told me once that she loved Papa but hated the ranch, that she felt trapped here. Eliza came around the table and crouched down beside Emma's chair. That must have been very hard for you to hear. I felt bad because I loved the ranch. I loved the horses and the mountains and the creek. I didn't want to leave. Emma's eyes filled with tears. And then Mama died, and I thought maybe it was my fault for not wanting what she wanted. Oh, sweetheart, no. Eliza pulled the girl into her arms without thinking, and this time Emma came willingly. Your mother's death wasn't anyone's fault. Childbirth is dangerous. It has nothing to do with what you wanted or didn't want. But if she'd been in Denver, in a real hospital, then maybe things would have been different, or maybe they wouldn't have. We'll never know. Eliza stroked Emma's hair, feeling the girl's small body shake with sobs. But I do know that your mother loved you desperately. And she loved your father, even if she struggled with ranch life. People can hold two truths at the same time. They can love someone and still be unhappy. It doesn't make the love less real. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the afternoon light faded and the stew simmered on the stove. When Emma finally pulled back, her face was blotchy but calmer. I'm sorry I've been mean to you, she said in a small voice. You didn't deserve that. You were protecting your mother's memory. I understand that. But you're not trying to replace her. You're just trying to survive too. Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve. Mrs. Chen told me that. She said you and Papa are both just doing your best in a bad situation. Mrs. Chen is a wise woman. Are you really going to stay, even after everything with Mr. Gaines? Eliza stood, returning to the stove. I'm staying. Your father and I are in this together now, for better or worse, like the vows said. That night, after Emma had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Eliza sat in the bedroom with Caleb and told him about her conversation with his daughter. He listened with his eyes closed, one hand pressed against his bandaged shoulder. Sarah was miserable here, he said when she finished. I knew it, but I kept hoping she'd adjust, that she'd learn to love the land the way I do. Instead, she just got sadder and quieter, until the pregnancy gave her hope of a way out. His voice roughened. She died trying to escape me. She died trying to give you a son, Eliza corrected gently. There's a difference. Is there? She thought a boy would mean I'd finally sell the ranch, move to civilization. She was gambling with her life for freedom. He opened his eyes, and they were dark with old pain. I killed her by refusing to leave this place. No, the childbirth killed her, and her own desperation, and the fact that we live in a world where women's bodies are expected to risk death to produce heirs. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle his injured shoulder. You didn't kill her, Caleb. You just couldn't save her. There's a difference. I don't know how to let her go, he whispered. I don't know how to stop carrying her around like a ghost. Then don't. Keep her memory. Honor what you had, but stop punishing yourself for not being able to make her happy. Eliza's hand found his, their fingers threading together. Sarah made her own choices. She chose to stay, chose to get pregnant, chose to hope for a different future. You don't have to carry the weight of those choices alone. Caleb squeezed her hand, and they sat in silence while moonlight spilled through the window and the night sounds of the ranch drifted in. Cattle lowing, horses shifting in the barn, the eternal whisper of wind through the pines. When this is over, he said eventually, when we've dealt with Gaines and the legal mess and everything else, if you want to leave then, I'll understand. And if I don't want to leave? He turned his head to look at her, and something raw and vulnerable flickered in his expression. Then we'd have to figure out what this marriage really is, because right now I don't think either of us knows anymore. Eliza thought about that as she lay in bed later, listening to Caleb's breathing even out into sleep. He was right. This marriage had stopped being a simple business arrangement somewhere along the way. It had become something messier, more complicated, more real. She cared about him in ways she hadn't anticipated, cared about Emma, cared about the ranch and the fight they were in together. But was it love? And did it matter what it was called, as long as it meant they were both willing to stay and fight? The next morning brought Thomas Dawson back to the ranch, this time with a second lawyer in tow, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Morris, who specialized in territorial land disputes. They spread documents across the kitchen table while Caleb sat propped against pillows and Emma practiced her letters in the corner. The good news, Dawson said, is that Marshall Dockery found shell casings at the shooting site that match a weapon reported stolen from Mountain Resources 3 weeks ago. That creates a direct link between the attack and Gaines's company. And the bad news? Eliza asked. The bad news is that Gaines has officially filed a complaint against you both for harassment and defamation. He claims you've been spreading false rumors about his business practices, threatening his employees, and trying to damage his reputation in the community. Rebecca Morris pushed a sheaf of papers across the table. It's pure retaliation, but it complicates things. If we push too hard on the criminal charges, he'll push back with civil suits that could drag on for years. Caleb's face was grim. So he shoots me and then accuses us of harassment. That's rich. It's strategic, Morris corrected. He's trying to bury you in legal fees and procedural delays until you give up and settle on his terms. It's a common tactic with wealthy litigants. She pulled out another document. However, I've been doing some digging into Mountain Resources Limited. Their incorporation papers list 3 principal investors, Harold Gaines, Judge Morrison, and a businessman from Denver named Carlisle Webb. Webb has a history of fraudulent mining claims and suspicious land acquisitions. 2 years ago, he was sued by a rancher in Wyoming for using forged surveys to claim mineral rights. Can we use that? Eliza leaned forward, her mind racing. Potentially. If we can prove that Webb and Gaines are running the same scheme here, using fraudulent surveys and legal manipulation to steal land, we can bring in the territorial attorney general, make this a criminal matter instead of just a civil dispute. Morris smiled thinly. But we'd need solid evidence. Documents, testimony from other victims, something that proves a pattern of illegal behavior. I can find it, Eliza said immediately. Give me a week. I'll talk to every rancher in the valley, every business owner Gaines has foreclosed on, every person who's had dealings with him. If there's a pattern, I'll document it. Dawson looked skeptical. That's a lot of ground to cover, and people might not be willing to talk. They'll talk to me. I'm already the most hated woman in Blackstone. I've got nothing left to lose. Eliza's expression was fierce. And I'm very good at asking the right questions. After the lawyers left with promises to return in a week, Caleb caught Eliza's arm as she started to clear the table. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Going around the valley, making yourself a bigger target, it's dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous. At least this way I'm being useful. She covered his hand with hers. Besides, I want to know the truth. If Gaines has been doing this to other people, they deserve justice too. Over the next 7 days, Eliza became a woman on a mission. She drove the wagon to every ranch, every farm, every homestead within 20 miles. She sat in dusty kitchens and listened to stories of debt, foreclosure, and loss. She took meticulous notes on loan terms, interest rates, and suspicious property claims. And slowly, a picture emerged of Harold Gaines's operation that was far more extensive and predatory than they'd imagined. The Hendersons had lost their farm after Gaines raised interest rates without notice. The Millers had been pressured to sell their water rights at below-market prices. The Johnsons had defaulted on a loan when Gaines suddenly demanded full payment 6 months early. Widow Patterson had signed away her late husband's mining claim because Gaines told her it was worthless, only to discover months later that he'd sold the same claim for 20 times what he'd paid her. Every story added to the damning evidence. Every victim gave Eliza more ammunition, and with each conversation, her fury at the systematic exploitation grew colder and more focused. She was returning from the Patterson widow's cabin on the 6th day when she noticed she was being followed. 2 riders keeping pace about a quarter-mile back, their faces shadowed by hat brims. Eliza's heart kicked up, but she kept the wagon moving steadily, her rifle within reach under the seat. The riders closed the distance as she neared a narrow section of road flanked by heavy timber. Eliza's hand crept toward the rifle, but before she could reach it, a 3rd rider emerged from the trees ahead, blocking her path. She recognized him, one of the men who'd shot Caleb. Her blood went cold. "Afternoon, Mrs. Turner." The man's smile was ugly. "Mr. Gaines would like a word with you. Mr. Gaines can make an appointment like a civilized person." Eliza's voice was steady despite her racing pulse. Now get out of my way. Afraid I can't do that. See, you've been causing problems, talking to people you shouldn't talk to, asking questions that ain't your business. Mr. Gaines thinks maybe you need a reminder about knowing your place. The two riders behind had closed in, boxing her wagon. Eliza calculated her options. She could try to shoot her way out, but 3 against 1 were bad odds. She could try to run, but they'd catch her easily. Or she could stay calm and see what they actually wanted. If you're going to threaten me, at least have the decency to deliver the message directly, she said coolly. I'm not interested in dealing with hired thugs. That got their attention. The lead rider's smile faded. You got a smart mouth for a woman in your position. And you have poor grammar for a man trying to intimidate someone. Now either shoot me or get out of my way, but stop wasting my time. It was a calculated risk, showing no fear. Bullies expected victims to cower. When their targets refused to play along, it sometimes threw them off balance. The rider hesitated, clearly not expecting this response. Then hoofbeats sounded from the direction of the ranch, and Marshal Dockery appeared around the bend with his rifle already drawn. Gentlemen, the marshal said pleasantly, you're blocking a public road. I suggest you move along before I cite you for obstruction. The riders exchanged glances, then spurred their horses and disappeared into the trees. Dockery rode up beside Eliza's wagon, his expression grim. You all right, Mrs. Turner? Fine. Shaken, but fine. She released her death grip on the edge of the seat. How did you know to come? Been keeping an eye on you when I can. Figured Gaines might try something. He holstered his rifle. You're making powerful enemies with your investigation. Good. Maybe it means I'm getting close to something he doesn't want found. Eliza gathered the reins with hands that only trembled slightly. Did you recognize those men? 2 of them. They've been hanging around Blackstone for the past week, staying at the boarding house. 3rd one's new. Dockery's jaw tightened. I'll bring them in for questioning, but without witnesses to an actual crime, I can't hold them long. Then we need to move faster, gather enough evidence that Gaines can't hide behind hired muscle and legal manipulation. Eliza met his eyes. I have statements from 11 families documenting illegal foreclosures, fraudulent loans, and coerced property transfers. Is that enough? For the Territorial Attorney General? Maybe. But you'd need to convince people to testify in court, and most folks are too scared of Gaines to do that. Then I'll convince them, because the alternative is letting him keep stealing from people who can't fight back. Eliza lifted her chin. Drive ahead of me to the ranch, Marshal. I don't want to meet those men again without backup. That evening, Eliza spread her documentation across the kitchen table. 11 sworn statements, copies of loan agreements, evidence of survey fraud, patterns of exploitation that couldn't be explained away as normal business practice. Caleb read through it all with growing amazement. You did this in less than a week? He looked up at her with something close to awe. Eliza, this is extraordinary. This is enough to bury Gaines. It's enough to start an investigation. Whether it's enough to convict him depends on whether the Territorial Attorney General cares more about justice than politics. She sank into a chair, exhausted. But yes, I think we have a real case now. You could have been killed today. Those men could have... Caleb stopped, his face going pale. I can't lose you, Eliza. Not like this. Not because I dragged you into my fight with Gaines. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose this. She reached across the table, took his hand. I chose to stay, chose to fight, chose to stand beside you. That was my decision, Caleb. Mine. He stared at their joined hands, then lifted his gaze to her face. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. She smiled slightly. Besides, someone has to keep you from working yourself to death or getting shot by hired thugs. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Then Caleb stood, moved around the table, and pulled her gently to her feet with his good arm. They stood very close, close enough that Eliza could feel the heat of his body, could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Sarah was my first love, he said quietly, and I'll always carry a piece of that with me. But you, Eliza, you're something different, something I didn't know I needed. You're fierce and brilliant and braver than anyone I've ever met. And somewhere in the past month, I stopped thinking of you as my forced wife and started thinking of you as my partner, my equal, my... He stopped, the word catching in his throat. Eliza reached up, touched his face gently. Say it, she whispered. My choice, Caleb finished. You're my choice, Eliza. Not because Gaines forced us together, not because of debt or inheritance or survival, but because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. Worth loving, if you'll let me. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know how to be loved, Caleb. I've spent my whole life being told I'm too smart, too independent, too much. Every man who showed interest wanted to fix me, tame me, make me smaller. I don't know how to be a wife in any traditional sense. Good. Because I don't want traditional. I want you, exactly as you are, stubborn and fearless and sharp as a blade. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. I want the woman who saved my life and faced down armed men and challenged a banker without blinking. I want the woman who's teaching my daughter that strength and intelligence are things to be proud of. I want you, Eliza. Just you. She kissed him then, rising up on her toes to press her mouth to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other. Then it deepened, became something more, a promise, a claim, a choosing of each other that had nothing to do with contracts or obligation and everything to do with the connection forged in fire and hardship. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. We still have to deal with Gaines, he murmured. Still have to fight the legal battle. Still have to figure out how to make this ranch survive. I know, but now we're doing it as partners who actually want to be together. Eliza smiled against his lips. That changes everything. Upstairs, Emma listened to the murmur of voices from the kitchen and felt something tight in her chest finally begin to loosen. She'd been so afraid of losing her father, afraid of losing her memories of her mother, afraid of this strange new woman who'd invaded their home. But listening to them now, hearing the warmth in their voices, Emma understood something important. Eliza wasn't trying to replace Sarah. She was just trying to build something new alongside the memory of what had been. And maybe, Emma thought, that was okay. Maybe there was room in their house for both, for the mother who'd loved her but died, and for the woman who chose to stay and fight when she could have run. Maybe having Eliza didn't mean forgetting Sarah. Maybe it just meant their family was growing instead of staying frozen in grief. The thought was strange and frightening and oddly comforting all at once. Emma pulled her mother's shawl closer around her shoulders and whispered into the darkness, It's okay, Mama. You can rest now. We're going to be all right. And for the first time since her mother's death, Emma actually believed it. The Territorial Attorney General arrived in Blackstone on a cold November morning when the first snow dusted the mountain peaks and the aspens stood bare and silver against the sky. His name was William Hackett, a barrel-chested man with steel-gray hair and a reputation for despising corruption in all its forms. He set up temporary headquarters in the Blackstone courthouse and spent 3 days reviewing the evidence Eliza had compiled, calling in witnesses and asking questions that left Harold Gaines looking increasingly nervous. Eliza sat in the courtroom gallery beside Caleb, their fingers intertwined, and watched Gaines squirm under Hackett's methodical interrogation. The banker maintained his composure, his expensive suit immaculate, his answers carefully rehearsed. But there were cracks forming in his facade, a tightness around his eyes, a hesitation before responding, the way his gaze kept darting to the door as if calculating escape routes. On the third day, Rebecca Morris called Widow Patterson to the stand. The elderly woman trembled as she testified about signing away her husband's mining claim for $500, only to learn later that Gaines had sold it for $12,000. Her voice broke when she described how she'd trusted him because he'd been kind to her at her husband's funeral, how he'd told her she was too fragile to manage business affairs on her own. He made me feel stupid, she said, tears streaming down her weathered face. Made me think I should be grateful someone was willing to help a foolish old woman, and I believed him because I didn't know any better. Judge Morrison, who'd been presiding with obvious bias toward Gaines, shifted uncomfortably. Even he couldn't dismiss the raw pain in Patterson's testimony. Then came the Hendersons, the Millers, the Johnsons, one family after another recounting similar stories of manipulation, coercion, and theft disguised as legitimate business. With each testimony, the picture of systematic fraud became undeniable. And through it all, Eliza's meticulous documentation provided the framework that held everything together: loan agreements with altered terms, surveys with conveniently misplaced boundary markers, property transfers signed under duress. On the fourth day, Attorney General Hackett called Harold Gaines himself to the stand. The banker's lawyer objected strenuously, citing Fifth Amendment protections. But Hackett pressed forward with civil questions that Gaines couldn't refuse to answer without looking guilty. "Mr. Gaines, is it true that you hold controlling interest in Mountain Resources Limited?" "Yes, along with several other investors." "And is it true that Mountain Resources filed a claim on Turner Ranch property based on alleged survey errors from 40 years ago?" "We filed a legitimate claim based on new evidence provided by surveyor Marcus Webb, who happens to be the nephew of Carlisle Webb, your business partner. The same Carlisle Webb who was convicted of survey fraud in Wyoming in 1879. Hackett held up a document. "Did you disclose this family connection when filing your claim?" Gaines's face went white. "I wasn't aware of the relationship." "Really?" "Because I have correspondence here between you and Carlisle Webb discussing the need to hire someone reliable who understands the importance of flexible boundaries." That's a direct quote from your letter dated August 15th. Hackett's voice was hard as granite. "Mr. Gaines, did you conspire with Marcus Webb to create fraudulent survey documents in order to steal property from Caleb Turner?" "No, that's slander. I have every right to pursue legitimate business interests. Did you hire armed men to shoot Mr. Turner when he refused to abandon his legal challenge?" "Absolutely not. Those men were paid from Mountain Resources accounts. We have the bank records, Mr. Gaines. We have testimony from one of the gunmen who's agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. We have shell casings that match weapons stolen from your company. We have everything." Hackett leaned forward. "So I'll ask you again, under oath. Did you conspire to defraud multiple property owners in this territory through illegal means, and did you use violence and intimidation when your victims attempted to fight back?" The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Gaines sat frozen, his lawyer frantically whispering in his ear, his face ashen. Judge Morrison looked like he wanted to crawl under his bench. And in the gallery, Eliza squeezed Caleb's hand so hard her knuckles went white. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination," Gaines finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Hackett smiled grimly. "Of course you do. No further questions, Your Honor." The judge called a recess and the courtroom erupted in whispers. Eliza and Caleb were immediately surrounded by other victims, the Hendersons shaking Caleb's hand, Widow Patterson hugging Eliza with tears of gratitude, the Millers promising to help rebuild the Turner barn that had been on the list of needed improvements. Marshal Dockery appeared at Eliza's elbow. "Hackett's filing criminal charges, fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. Gaines is going to prison, Mrs. Turner. You did that." "We did that," Eliza corrected, glancing at all the families who'd been brave enough to testify. "All of us together." That evening, back at the ranch, they found Emma sitting on the porch steps with Mrs. Chen, both of them wrapped in quilts against the November cold. The girl jumped up when the wagon approached, running to meet them with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "Did you win?" "Everyone at school was talking about the trial. Miss Hartwell said Mr. Gaines is going to jail and that you were very brave, Eliza." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Is it really over?" "Not entirely," Caleb said, lifting his daughter up with his good arm. The wounded shoulder was healing well, but still stiff. "There'll be more hearings, more legal work, but the hardest part is done. Gaines won't be able to hurt us or anyone else anymore." Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, then reached out to include Eliza in the embrace. "I'm glad. I was scared he was going to take the ranch, and we'd have to leave." "Never," Eliza said softly. "This land belongs to your family. No one's taking it." Inside, Mrs. Chen had prepared a celebration dinner: roasted chicken, fresh bread, apple pie made from the last of the fall harvest. They ate together around the kitchen table, and for the first time since Eliza had arrived, the house felt warm instead of haunted. Emma chattered about school, about her teacher's reaction to the trial, about the other children finally stopping their cruel whispers. Caleb told stories about his grandfather homesteading the land, about the first terrible winter, and the wolves that had stalked the cattle. And Eliza listened, feeling herself weaving into the fabric of their family history, becoming part of the story instead of an outsider looking in. After dinner, Emma asked if Eliza would help her with her arithmetic homework. They sat together at the table, Emma's dark head bent close to Eliza's fair one, working through problems about acres and yields and percentages. When the girl made a mistake, Eliza guided her toward the right answer instead of just giving it to her, and Emma's face lit up with pride when she solved the problem herself. "You're good at teaching," Emma said. "Better than Miss Hartwell. She just tells us the answers and gets mad when we don't understand." "That's because Miss Hartwell doesn't actually want you to learn. She wants you to memorize and obey." Eliza tapped the slate with her pencil. "Real learning is about understanding why things work, not just accepting what you're told." "Is that what you did at your college in Chicago?" "Among other things, I studied mathematics, literature, philosophy. I learned to question everything and never accept easy answers." She smiled slightly. "It made me very unpopular with people who preferred women to be quiet and decorative." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "I'm glad you're not quiet and decorative. I'm glad you're smart and brave. And I'm glad you married Papa, even if it started out bad." The simple honesty of it brought tears to Eliza's eyes. She pulled Emma close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. More than you know." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed and Mrs. Chen had returned to her own home, Caleb and Eliza stood on the porch, watching snow begin to fall in earnest. The flakes drifted down through the darkness, catching the lamplight from the windows, transforming the ranch into something from a fairy tale. "Your shoulder's healing well," Eliza observed, noting how freely he was moving now. "Thanks to your doctoring. Mrs. Chen says you have a gift for it." Caleb wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close against the cold. "Have you ever thought about practicing medicine officially? Getting certified, maybe opening a clinic?" Women can't get medical licenses in most territories. The few female doctors who exist had to fight tooth and nail for recognition, and even then they're limited to treating women and children. But there was longing in her voice. "Why do you ask?" "Because this valley needs a doctor. The nearest one is in Denver, 2 days' ride in good weather. People die here from things that could be easily treated if someone with medical knowledge lived closer." He turned to face her. "I'm not saying it would be easy. You'd face the same prejudice you've faced everywhere else, but you've already proven you don't back down from a fight." Eliza stared at him, hope and fear warring in her chest. "You'd support that? A wife who worked outside the home, who treated patients, who wasn't conventional in any way?" "Eliza, I married you because you're not conventional. Why would I want you to change now?" He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I want you to be happy. If that means being the territory's first female doctor, then that's what we'll make happen. Together." She kissed him then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring everything she couldn't say into the kiss: gratitude, love, wonder that she'd found a man who saw her strength as an asset instead of a threat. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, snow had collected in their hair and on their shoulders. "I love you," she whispered. "I didn't think I could. Didn't think I'd ever trust anyone enough. But I love you, Caleb Turner. I love you too, so much it terrifies me." He rested his forehead against hers. "When those men shot me, when I thought I might die, all I could think was that I'd never told you how extraordinary you are, how you saved me in ways that have nothing to do with doctoring my shoulder." "We saved each other," Eliza corrected. "That's what partners do." 3 weeks later, on a bright December morning with snow thick on the ground, Harold Gaines stood before Judge Morrison one final time. The banker had aged visibly, his face was gaunt, his suit hung loose, and his hands trembled as he listened to the verdict. Guilty on all counts. 15 years in the territorial prison, restitution to all his victims, forfeiture of all business assets and property holdings. Judge Morrison, who'd miraculously escaped formal charges but would never hold public office again, delivered the sentence with visible distaste for the man who'd dragged him into scandal. When the bailiff led Gaines away in shackles, he passed directly by Eliza and Caleb. For just a moment, he stopped. You should have taken my offer and left, he said to Eliza, his voice hollow. You would have been rich and free instead of tied to a failing ranch and someone else's child. I am free, Eliza replied calmly. Freer than you'll ever be again. And I chose this life, which makes it infinitely more valuable than anything you could have offered me. Gaines stared at her, then laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You're a fool. Perhaps. But I'm a fool who won. She met his eyes without flinching. Enjoy prison, Mr. Gaines. I hear the winters there are particularly harsh. Outside the courthouse, they found a crowd waiting. The Hendersons, the Millers, the Johnsons, Widow Patterson, and at least 20 other families who'd suffered under Gaines's exploitation. Someone started clapping, and then everyone joined in, a wave of applause that followed Caleb and Eliza as they walked to their wagon. You folks did something important here, Mr. Henderson said, shaking Caleb's hand vigorously. You stood up when most of us were too scared. You gave us courage. We just refused to be victims, Caleb replied. Same as all of you did when you testified. The restitution money came through in January, distributed to all of Gaines's victims according to what they'd lost. For the Turners, it meant enough capital to finally make the improvements the ranch desperately needed. Caleb hired workers to build a proper barn, to expand the irrigation system, to fence the eastern pasture properly. The work was hard, and the winter was harsh, but they were no longer struggling alone. Eliza used part of her inheritance to purchase medical techs and equipment, transforming Sarah's old sewing room into a clinic. Word spread quickly that Turner Ranch had a woman who knew medicine, and soon neighbors were showing up with ailments ranging from broken bones to difficult pregnancies to mysterious fevers. Eliza treated them all, refusing to turn anyone away, building a reputation as someone who saved lives instead of just delivering babies and tending colds. Emma thrived with each passing month. She started bringing friends home from school, girls who admired her unconventional stepmother, who thought it was wonderful that Eliza could set bones and deliver calves and do arithmetic better than the boys. Under Eliza's gentle guidance, the girl began to see education not as something that made her strange, but as something that made her powerful. One February evening, as Eliza was cleaning instruments after treating a rancher's infected hand, Emma appeared in the clinic doorway. Can I watch you work sometime? The girl asked. I mean, really watch. Not just see you bandage cuts, but the hard stuff, the medical stuff. Eliza looked up, surprised. It's not pleasant. Sometimes there's a lot of blood. Sometimes people are in terrible pain, and there's nothing I can do but make them comfortable. I know, but I still want to learn. Emma's jaw set with familiar determination. If I'm going to be a doctor someday, I need to start preparing now. A doctor? Eliza's heart swelled. You want to be a doctor? Why not? You're basically one already, even if the stupid laws won't give you a license. And you said women can do anything men can do if they work hard enough. Emma crossed her arms. So I'm going to work hard enough. And when I'm old enough, I'm going to medical school, a real one. And I'm going to come back here and work with you. Eliza crossed the room and pulled the girl into a fierce embrace. Then I'll teach you everything I know, starting tomorrow. That spring brought change to more than just the Turner Ranch. The territorial legislature, embarrassed by the Gaines scandal and pressured by Attorney General Hackett, passed new regulations on banking practices and land claims. They also, quietly, without much fanfare, approved a provision allowing women with demonstrated medical knowledge to practice medicine under special territorial license if they could pass a rigorous examination and secure endorsements from established physicians. It wasn't equality. It wasn't even close. But it was a crack in the wall, and Eliza intended to wedge it wide open. She traveled to Denver in April with letters of recommendation from every family she'd treated, from Marshall Dockery, from Attorney General Hackett himself. The examining board was skeptical. 3 elderly male doctors who clearly thought this was a waste of their time. But after 6 hours of grueling questions on anatomy, surgery, pharmacology, and practical medicine, they grudgingly admitted she knew her subject better than most graduates of their programs. You understand, the head examiner said as he signed her license, that this doesn't make you equal to a real physician. You'll be limited in what you can do, and many people will refuse to be treated by a woman. I understand that small-minded people will always find reasons to discriminate, Eliza replied pleasantly. But that's their loss, not mine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients waiting. She returned to Turner Ranch with an official medical license in her bag and tears of triumph streaming down her face. Caleb met her at the door, took one look at her expression, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. "I did it," she gasped against his shoulder. "I'm actually a licensed doctor, the first female doctor in Colorado Territory." "The first of many," Caleb predicted. "Emma's already telling everyone at school that she's going to follow in your footsteps." That summer, on a warm June evening when the valley was green and the creek ran high with snowmelt, Caleb took Eliza's hand and led her up to the ridge where his father and grandfather were buried. Two simple headstones marked their graves, weathered by wind and time. But there was space for more. Space for future generations who would love this land and fight for it the way the Turners always had. "Sarah's buried in Blackstone, in the churchyard," Caleb said quietly. "She wanted to be in town, near civilization. But I want to be here when my time comes. On the land, where I can watch over the ranch forever." Eliza squeezed his hand. "That's a long time from now." "Maybe. But when it happens, I want you beside me. Here, in this earth, under these mountains. Partners in death the way we've been partners in life." He turned to face her. "I know that's a lot to ask. You might want to be buried somewhere else, somewhere more—" "Here is perfect," Eliza interrupted. "With you, with this land that we fought for and saved together. There's nowhere else I'd rather rest." They stood in silence as the sun sank toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Below them, the ranch spread out in a patchwork of pastures and buildings and possibility. The new barn stood proud and solid. Cattle grazed peacefully in fields crisscrossed by irrigation ditches. And in the house, lights were beginning to glow as Emma set the table for dinner. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "That day in the church, when you had to marry a stranger to save yourself? Do you wish you'd found another way?" Eliza considered the question seriously. "I regret that we were both forced into impossible positions. I regret that Harold Gaines thought he could play with people's lives like chess pieces. But do I regret marrying you?" She shook her head. "Not for a single moment. Because, yes, it started as coercion and desperation, but it became something real, something chosen, something worth fighting for." "Worth dying for?" "Worth living for," she corrected, "which is harder and braver and infinitely more important." 2 years later, on a spring morning bright with promise, Eliza delivered her first baby as a licensed physician, a healthy boy born to Mrs. Miller after a difficult pregnancy that had terrified the whole family. When she placed the squalling infant in his mother's arms and saw the tears of joy and relief, Eliza felt something settle deep in her soul. This was her calling. Not just treating illness, but bringing life into the world, giving hope to people who'd been told there was none. Emma, now 11 and serious about her medical studies, assisted with the delivery. She handed Eliza instruments without being asked, kept the mother calm during the worst contractions, and cleaned the baby with gentle competence. Afterward, as they walked to the wagon together, the girl was vibrating with excitement. "That was amazing," Emma breathed. "The way you knew exactly what to do, how you stayed calm, even when Mrs. Miller was screaming. That's what I want to do. I want to help people like that." "Then you will," Eliza promised. "You're already better at this than I was at your age. By the time you're ready for medical school, you'll be extraordinary." At the ranch, they found Caleb in negotiations with 3 neighboring ranchers about forming a cattlemen's association, a cooperative that would give them collective bargaining power with buyers and protection against the kind of exploitation Gaines had practiced. Eliza listened to him outline the proposal with pride swelling in her chest. This was the man she'd married, strong and stubborn, yes, but also fair and forward-thinking, willing to build alliances instead of fighting alone. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Caleb pulled Eliza into his arms in the bedroom they'd shared for 3 years now. "I never thanked you properly," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For choosing to stay when you could have left. For fighting when you could have run. For loving me when I didn't deserve it, and loving Emma when she made it as hard as possible." His arms tightened around her. "For taking a forced marriage and making it real." "We made it real together," Eliza corrected. "That's what partnership means." "Still, Thank you. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You saved more than just my ranch, Eliza. You saved me. And you gave me a home when I thought I'd never have one. A family when I thought I'd always be alone. A purpose that goes beyond just surviving. She looked up at him, this man who'd started as a stranger and become her everything. We saved each other. That's the truth of it. 5 years after their wedding, Turner Ranch had become the most prosperous operation in the valley. The cattle herd had tripled. The irrigation system was the envy of neighboring ranchers. The barn stood solid and weatherproof, painted red like proper Eastern barns but built with Colorado timber. And beside the house, a separate building with a sign reading Dr. E. Turner, Physician, saw a steady stream of patients from across the territory. Emma, now 13 and determined, had already been accepted into a preparatory program in Denver for girls interested in medicine. She would leave in the fall, but she'd already made Eliza promise to write every week with updates on interesting cases. The girl who'd once hated her stepmother now saw Eliza as her role model, her mentor, her mother in every way that mattered. On their 5th anniversary, Caleb surprised Eliza with a gift, a small, leather-bound book with blank pages. For your medical notes, he explained. You're always scribbling on loose paper, losing track of case histories. This way you can keep everything organized, document your work properly. Eliza opened the book and found an inscription on the first page in Caleb's careful handwriting. To Dr. Eliza Turner, who proves every day that the best things in life are worth fighting for. With love, always, your partner. She pressed the book to her chest, overcome. It's perfect. You're perfect. I'm really not. I'm stubborn and taciturn, and I still work too many hours. But he was smiling. But I'm yours. For better or worse, remember? For better or worse, she echoed, though I have to say it's been mostly better lately. That night they made love with the windows open to let in the summer breeze, moving together with the practiced ease of long familiarity, but also with tenderness that never faded. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Eliza traced the scar on Caleb's shoulder, faded now, but still visible, a permanent reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if Gaines had won? She asked. Sometimes. But then I remember that he didn't win. We did. And every day since then has been proof that fighting back was worth it. Caleb kissed her shoulder. We built something here, Eliza. Something that's going to outlast us both. A legacy. A family, he corrected. A real one. Chosen and fought for and earned. 10 years after their forced wedding in Blackstone's cold church, Eliza stood in the same building for a very different ceremony. Emma, now 18 and home from her first year of medical school, was being honored by the Territorial Medical Society for her groundbreaking research on childhood diseases. The girl, now a young woman, stood at the front of the church in a simple blue dress, her dark hair pinned up, her mother's shawl draped over her shoulders, and accepted the award with grace and intelligence. I wouldn't be here without 2 people, Emma said in her speech, her voice steady and strong. My father, who taught me that determination can overcome any obstacle, and my mother, my stepmother by law, but my mother in every way that truly matters, who showed me that women can be anything they choose to be if they're brave enough to fight for it. She looked directly at Eliza, who was crying openly in the front pew with Caleb's arm around her shoulders. Dr. Turner didn't just teach me medicine. She taught me strength. She taught me that forced beginnings don't determine endings. She taught me that love is something you choose every single day, not something that just happens to you. Emma's voice wavered slightly. She came into our lives as a stranger, forced into marriage by a cruel man's manipulation. But she chose to stay, chose to fight, chose to love us. And in doing so, she saved us in ways we didn't even know we needed saving. The applause was thunderous. Eliza stood, and Emma came down from the podium to embrace her, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. Caleb joined them, wrapping his arms around both his wife and his daughter, creating a circle of 3 people who'd found each other through tragedy and built something beautiful from the ruins. Outside, Blackstone had changed. The bank that had once been Harold Gaines's seat of power was now run by a cooperative of local businessmen committed to fair practices. The school had a new teacher who encouraged girls to pursue education as vigorously as boys, and the town that had once whispered cruel things about Eliza Turner now pointed to her with pride as their first female doctor, the woman who'd brought down a corrupt banker and saved countless lives. That evening, back at Turner Ranch, 3 generations sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Emma was leaving for Denver again in the morning to continue her studies, but tonight they were together, talking, laughing, sharing stories about patients and cattle and the 1,000 small details that made up their lives. "Tell me again about the wedding," Emma said, as she had countless times over the years. "About how it all started." Caleb and Eliza exchanged glances, and he began the story the way he always did. "It was the worst day of my life," he said, "standing in that church, being forced to marry a stranger, feeling like everything I loved was being taken from me." He took Eliza's hand, "But it was also the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to me, because that stranger became my partner, my equal, my love. She became the person I choose every single day to build a life with." "It was terrible and wonderful all at once," Eliza added, "like most important things in life. We didn't choose each other at first, but we chose each other eventually, and we kept choosing each other every day after that. That's what made it real." Emma smiled, satisfied with the familiar story. "Good. Because when I write my memoirs someday, I want to get the details right. The story of how my mother fought a banker, saved my father's life, became a doctor, and proved that even the worst beginnings can lead to beautiful endings." "We're not at the ending yet," Caleb protested. "We've got a lot of living left to do." "Then I'll call it beautiful middles," Emma amended. "The middle part where everything is hard and messy and absolutely worth fighting for." As stars emerged in the darkening sky and the first cool breath of autumn whispered down from the mountains, the Turner family sat together in the home they'd fought for and saved. The ranch sprawled around them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to determination and partnership and love that refused to be broken. Harold Gaines had tried to trap them, to control them, to use them as pawns in his schemes. But he'd made a fundamental miscalculation. He'd assumed that people forced together would stay weak and divided. He'd never considered that shared struggle could forge bonds stronger than any freely chosen at the beginning. He'd never imagined that a marriage born of coercion could transform into something genuine and fierce and unbreakable. Eliza looked at her husband, the man she'd been forced to marry and had chosen to love. She looked at Emma, the daughter who'd hated her and now saw her as a role model. She looked at the ranch, the land they'd nearly lost and had fought to save, and she felt gratitude so profound it almost hurt. This life had started as a prison. It had become a home. These people had started as strangers. They had become her family. This marriage had started as a legal maneuver. It had become the greatest gift she'd ever received, not because it was easy or perfect or anything like she'd imagined, but because it was real, because it was chosen day after day in big ways and small, because when everything tried to tear them apart, they held together. Because love, real love, wasn't what happened when everything was easy. It was what you built when everything was hard. It was choosing to stay when leaving would be simpler. It was fighting for each other instead of against each other. It was taking forced vows spoken under threat and making them mean something through sheer determination and grace. As the last light faded from the sky and the ranch settled into peaceful darkness, Caleb pulled Eliza close and whispered the words he said every night before they slept. "I choose you." And Eliza, as she always did, whispered back, "I choose you too." It was the simplest promise and the most profound. It was everything they'd built together distilled into 4 words. It was the truth that had saved them both. In a church in Blackstone 10 years earlier, 2 strangers had spoken vows they didn't mean under threat and coercion. But here, now, under the stars that watched over Turner Ranch, those same 2 people spoke vows that meant everything, promises made freely, kept faithfully, honored daily. A marriage at gunpoint had become a marriage of genuine love. A family forged from ruin had become whole and strong. And 2 people who'd been forced together by a cruel man's manipulation had found in each other exactly what they'd been searching for all along: partnership, respect, passion, and a love that nothing could break. The story that began with a banker's pistol gleaming in autumn sun ended with stars shining over a ranch made prosperous through partnership. What started in coercion ended in choice. What began in desperation ended in joy. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.